So I said, he's a British celebrity, a TV host, no less. What are the conceivable odds he could also be a nonce? That's not.
Yeah.
And I've just. No, I'm actually seeing some tweets right. Oh, okay. Never mind.
Well,
maybe we should do Red. Let's do Red Planet. Actually, this is not panning out for me.
Well, I do want to just say that I never thought that someone who wrote a book called My Bookie Wook would be a nonce. That's just impossible for me to even think about. Like, how could that possibly have occurred?
That doesn't at all give incredible nonce vibes. It's Red Planet. We're here to talk about communism and apparently Russell Brand, but that one's going to be later in the news. So why don't instead I say, Kira, what's the most base thing you did this week?
Thanks for asking, Sophie. It's great to have you back here on Red Planet, by the way.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
Yeah. So nothing I can really think of off the top of my head because I've been going through a depression. So I have major depressive disorder, which means you just have depression forever. It's forever. You just have it. And it just peaks at times and then it goes away a little bit, but not quite ever. And the peaks, whatever. So right now I'm going through one of those depressions. And you know what? My base thing is I'm still around. I got the depression. I'm experiencing really shitty symptoms, but I'm still around. I'm still putting on Twitch shows, which by the way is not easy, but I'm doing it. I'm brushing my teeth. Can I say that something that needs to be discussed way more with regards to depression is how much you tend to neglect your teeth. And a lot of people have a lot of shame with regards to how their teeth end up becoming, enamel wearing off, cavities, what have you, because of depression. So I just want to make that point for that little education.
Real and worthwhile. Yeah.
Yeah. But also I've been forcing myself. I'm just drag a toothbrush over your teeth, just sit there and it's electric. And I'm just whatever. So I've been doing that. So yeah, that's the base thing I've been doing, just existing. So yeah. Mule, what about you? What's the most base thing you did?
I think that's pretty based. I'm glad Kira's here.
I'm glad you're here, and I think that's more than enough based. My based thing, the most based thing that I did this week was I told my gran what transgender people are. And
does she like us?
She's well up for it. And I actually told her about, she is. And I actually told her about TERFs as well, and she was not down for that.
Nice.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
The transgenders down for the TERFs. We're not. Wait. That's the bad.
She knows. That's kind of what she was doing. Actually, that's kind of how she was asking me. She was like, "So, and she was asking me all sorts of things, and she was going, "So, born a boy," and I was like, "Yes," but then became a woman, and I was like, "Yes." I was like, "Oh," and she just gets it. She's just like, "Great, fine with
nice.
that." Yeah. I also made her watch 1984, which was. She's 86, by the way. She doesn't really know what's going on a lot of the time. No, she does. She's very lucid.
Having come over to your house and you've put on various media the image of you insisting that a tiny old woman watches 1984 is it's just eminently picturable. I can just really see it.
It's really bad because if you actually know the story of 1984, which I do, 1984 is actually one of my favorite books, and if you know the story of 1984, you'll know that Winston Smith, main character, he has a fear of rats, and it's because he saw his mum get eaten by rats when she was dying because this, that, and the other, and a horrible thing happens to him at the end of 1984 involving rats, and I'd forgotten all of this, including the knowledge that my gran is fucking shit scared of rats. So we're watching this film and the rats are coming on the screen and she's going, woo! And so I had to pause it at bits when I knew there were rats. And then it got to the end of the film and I said, Gran, I'm just going to let you know that there is a really horrible bit coming up with rats. Shall I tell you about it? And she goes, no. And so I said, do you want to continue watching the film? And she said, no, he just dies, doesn't he? And I said, yes. And so we stopped watching the film at that point. But that was the most base thing that we did.
There you go.
So yeah, there we go. But yeah, that's been it basically. It's been really interesting, just sort of like talking to my gran about like various stuff. She's like asking about Red Planet, and it's really funny because I've told her that, like, you know,
maybe another sicko on the way.
Maybe we will see. My gran would definitely probably give us money to do what we do, but like she said, I mean, technically she already does. She gave me £30 to go to the shops the other day. So that counts, doesn't it?
That is supporting Red Planet.
She's supporting. She's shops.
Helping you'll be full of biscuits is actually supporting Red Planet.
I was fucking shit full of biscuits. That's not even a saying. But anyway, yeah, you know, telling about Red Planet, I was saying, you know, we have international hosts. We've got Tim, who's in New Zealand, and we've got Kira, who's in America. And she said to me tonight, and she goes, so you're going to do this show? I said, yeah. Where are you going to do that? And I said, I'm going to my house. She said, oh, they all come to your house, do they? And
oh, my heart.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
I said, Gran, you have no idea how much I would love it if every week all the Red Planet hosts got together in one place.
And even she understands transgender. Even she
it.
Like gets it.
She gets it.
She doesn't understand what the internet is, and she's just like
that's what I mean. She's so good. She's so
amazing.
good. Oh god. So there you go. That's the most base thing that I've done this week. I mean, just spending time with you, not like being real. Obviously this is all very funny. I've like forced my gran to watch this, like, you know, anarchist communist propaganda and all that. But you know, the on top of that, like actually just like being there for your elderly relatives, I think is like a very important thing. Because the thing is that she's at my mum's this week because my mum is on holiday. That's vacation for the Americans. And
and what's a nonce, just to be clear?
Oh, and just to be clear for the listeners at home,
we're doing the news in a minute. We'll get there.
We will get there. Nonce is pedo or pedo. For the American.
Oh,
listener.
That's what it means. I thought it was just like a goofy goof, like a silly.
It is
like a
goof.
silly Billy.
You could call someone a nonce without them actually having credible paedophile allegations against them, for sure. And it is very funny, especially if you call it like a Tory or something. Do you know what I mean?
But we truly are an international show.
We are an international. You might listen slightly. Americans are learning a completely new language, isn't it? So. Anyway, where was that? Oh yeah, so you know she's at my mum's while my mum is on holiday with my stepdad, and she's looking after my mum's dogs. And of course, she's an 86-year-old woman. She's not going to be able to do everything. And in fact, one of the nicest things, I spoke about this in Sophie's Discord the other day. She was wanting to use a walker that my mum's got her because she's getting very frail now as she gets on, and she never felt good or comfortable to use it before because she's been on her own and her husband is quite old as well. My granddad, he's not too good at helping her with stuff like that. And she felt very happy and able to use it because I was with her while we were walking around the park. And, you know, she was like, oh, that was amazing. I've not walked that long in ages. And so that felt really good to do. And I think that a lot of the time we do get encouraged to just leave elderly relatives, you know, under capitalism, you know, just let them rot basically. And I think that's vile. And I think like the more and more time that you can spend with your elderly relatives, if you're very lucky to have nice elderly relatives, I know some people don't, then you should, because they remember a lot of stuff. Surprisingly, a lot of people think that old people don't remember stuff, but they do. Stop laughing, Kira. For those of you listening at home who can't see this, look, Kira is wetting herself at the idea that elderly people can remember stuff. So that's that, isn't it? She's laughing even harder now at me explaining it like that. So anyway, it's very, very good and based to look after your elderly relatives. Even if they're not your relatives, just go and look after them. Radicalize your mum, radicalize your nan, make them watch 1984. Sophie, what's the most base thing you've done this week?
Well, I don't remember. I must be getting old.
That's it. That's what it is.
No, I completely. I really want to co-sign what you're saying about caring for older people, and also just like I think it's been really normal for hundreds of thousands of years of human existence for people to be around people of all ages, and then suddenly, like, now we're like only ever around people our own age for like most of our lives, and it's fucking bizarre. And yeah, taking care of your elderly relatives is fantastic. I have had a bit of an odd week of I don't know, not exactly seeing myself as particularly old in the trans community, because I am not. I've only been out for like 3 years, but like I am 27, and I was hanging out with someone the other day, and she was pointing out to me like how the mean age in a few trans spaces is more like 25-ish, and like I was like, oh shit, yeah, I'm kind of on the older side of some friendship groups and stuff. And we were chatting about like older trans women getting to get together, and how we'd probably have a lot more kind of productive discussions than a lot of the like younger folks who get very passionate but don't necessarily have kind of experience to like haven't necessarily figured some stuff out and stuff like that. So I was reflecting on that kind of stuff, and also and this does tie together. I feel like I'm being really old now. I feel like Mule's story has infected me with the old, and I'm giving like a really Grandpa Simpson vibe of a story.
It is an issue. It's true.
I've caught old from Mule's nan. But yeah, I've been mentioning I've been involved with an eviction resistance for some friends for a long time. And I actually did a little magic ritual. Did I already talk about this? I think
Not on Red Planet, I don't think.
After there was an eviction resistance, just basically like standing up to the landlord a bit. And then after that had happened, we we did a magic ritual to put a curse on him.
That is super cool, and I can't get behind this enough. Tell us more.
Well, it's Nat's been reading Caliban and the Witch, which is all about how much spirituality and magic was taken away from the indigenous cultures of Europe in the process of a sort of internal colonization. Like the aristocracy got together and they essentially colonized the peasants. Like they were like, no, you're going to have our culture. You're going to be Christians. You're gonna work to these hours, and you're gonna right. And a big part of this was like genocidal violence against women that we know casually as the witch hunts. And yeah, like a huge part of it was to do with like destroying somewhat more maternal and matriarchal societies and cultures and communities than we're used to thinking about now. And it's really horrible. And as I say, in The World Is Not Ending, the idea of women being relatively more free than they are now and then becoming less free is so horrible that people just generally don't like to even think about it. But it did happen. And in that context, I think that like thinking about magic is really important. And then one of my favorite games, A Bewitching Revolution, which we played on Red Planet, is based on a lot of these concepts. And it's why I've got given myself a tattoo that says Witch of the City. And so I was just trying to do a little bit of actual practicing of the Witch of the City kind of thing. So we did an eviction resistance, and then I wanted to get everyone to let go of their. There's this concept. There's this Nietzschean concept called ressentiment, which is not just French for resentment, although it also is. And basically, it's like if you feel oppressed by somebody else as part of a system. You might know there's a system, but because you can't overcome the oppression that they are giving to you, you project a power. They don't actually have this power, but because you can't overcome them, they seem more powerful than you. And so you hold these ressentiments, which are ultimately your own resentment that's holding you down and making them appear more powerful than you to you. And that's why we did a little curse. Basically, because if we all believe in the curse, then horrible bad things are going to happen to landlords, and we don't need to feel we don't need to feel any resentment, and we don't need to feel like the landlord is powerful, because he's not. True. He's just a little crybaby who is like, where's all my rent for doing nothing? Where's my thousands and thousands of pounds for doing nothing? That's a little baby boy. That's pathetic. Boy. That's So yeah, that's what I did, and that was my most based thing this week. We will talk about some news in a second, but first I just want to quickly say we want to know what based things you've been doing. You can message us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, or send an email to redplanetshow.com. Again, that's redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns if you'd like to, and we may shout it out in a later episode. So, who's going to tell me about Libya?
It's me. Libya has been in ruins from Storm Daniel. We're blaming NATO. More than 11,000 people are currently confirmed dead and up to 100,000 missing from the recent devastating cyclone Storm Daniel. So this has been all over the news. It's been on the mainstream media news. They're still not talking about it as much as they should, but it's an example of one of the many things that are going to come as a result of capitalism. In fact, this is actually a perfect example of something that's come from poor, terrible infrastructure under capitalism, and also climate change. So last year, Abdul Vanis Ashur wrote articles warning that Derna's dams were in poor condition and that a major flood would be, quote, likely to cause one of the two dams to collapse. Ashur continued, if a huge flood happens, the result will be catastrophic for the people of the Wadi and the city. No repairs have been done, however, because of the civil war that's raged between rival governments in eastern and western Libya since NATO destroyed Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's regime in the 2011 war. Since the fall of the Gaddafi regime, the rivaling Libyan governments, east and west, have been battling and have completely neglected the infrastructure of the country. As a result, these dams burst from Storm Daniel, flooding Libya and killing thousands. The country has been so overwhelmed from this catastrophe and the lack of other infrastructure that mass graves are being dug and bodies are being laid out on the street while more and more keep washing up to the shore. Some sources are blaming Libyan corruption or Libyan infrastructure neglect without mention of the NATO intervention. It's important to remember that these types of statements, when made of imperial periphery countries, should be approached with massive scrutiny. And I think as well that it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you could say infrastructure repair, it happened because it's a really bad country and they don't care for their own country and stuff like that. Well, no, it's a multitude of factors. Yeah. Not least of which is the unseating of Gaddafi and the lack of just any kind of compassion for the country of Libya.
Yeah. I mean, this is like we talked about Haiti a few times, and it's like where they're pointing to gangs run the country, everyone's scared of the gangs. It's like you're really looking at some degree of local organizing, and some of those people are literally gangsters, and some of those gangsters are actually scary to people. But if the country were treated with any kind of respect to the people of the country and their ability to self-determine and self-organize, then maybe even some of those same gangsters would be in charge, but they wouldn't be the material real problems would be less, and the bizarre exaggerations and propaganda wouldn't be bothering.
Yeah, completely agree. But next up, Sophie, you're going to be telling us about the Antarctic.
That is correct. Antarctic sea. I'm just going to start that one again. Antarctic sea ice at lowest ever recorded winter levels. It's a climate change update. It's that same story you've heard over and over again. It's like when The Onion publishes their template for minority in video game. Check it out. Summers are hot and winters are hot too. Yay. There's less ice in the Antarctic than there used to be. The sea ice surrounding Antarctica is well below any previous recorded winter level, satellite data shows, a worrying new benchmark for a region that once seemed resistant to global warming. The ice that floats on the Antarctic Ocean's surface now measures less than 17 million square kilometers. That is 1.5 million square kilometers of sea ice less than the September average, and well below previous winter record lows. Without its ice cooling, the planet Antarctica could transform from Earth's refrigerator to a radiator, experts say. Sea ice acts as a protective sleeve for the ice covering the land and prevents the ocean from heating up. As more sea ice disappears, it exposes dark areas of ocean which absorb sunlight instead of reflecting it, meaning that the heat energy is added to the water, which in turn melts more ice. Scientists call this the ice albedo effect. There are signs that what is already happening to Antarctica's ice sheets is in the worst-case scenario range of what was predicted, says Professor Anna Hogg, an Earth scientist at the University of Leeds. Even modest increases in sea levels can result in dangerously high storm surges that could wipe out coastal communities. If significant amounts of land ice were to start melting, the impacts would be catastrophic for millions of people around the world. Let's just move on. Kira, tell us about Unity.
Sure. So Unity Technologies, it's a company headquartered in San Francisco. It is best known for its game engine, its cross-platform game engine called Unity. For over a decade, Unity has been a go-to tool set for video game production, particularly in the mobile and the indie spaces. Like if you're playing a mobile game, there's the good chance that it's probably made with Unity. It's like a really, 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 really popular game engine. There's also PC and console games made with Unity, like City Skylines is made with Unity. I know Pokemon Go, which is a mobile game, but that's a really popular one made with Unity. RimWorld, Monument Valley, Beat Saber. There's a ton of games that are made with Unity. So, on Monday, Unity announced via its official blog that as of the beginning of 2024, it would change the terms by which it licenses its engine. The most controversial element of these changes is the introduction of this thing called a runtime fee. It's going to be a new monthly fee called a runtime fee, which would be charged each time a qualifying game made with Unity is downloaded by an end user. So the threshold for incurring this runtime fee is going to be determined by the version of Unity that the dev is using. For instance, users of the free personal package will become eligible for the fee if a single project were to pass $200,000 in revenue in the last year and 200,000 lifetime installations. At that point, Unity would charge a developer a flat 20 cents per install. And Unity claims that they can track these installations using their own proprietary software solution. It's going to be something that you install along with your game to track if you install the game. So if this wasn't bad enough, Unity also snuck into its terms of service that these changes can also be applied retroactively, meaning that if you have already made a game in Unity, now you can be charged this runtime fee, even if you made the game prior to, when they're making this announcement, when these changes are going to go into effect. So there's been a ton of outrage by game developers about this, like a ton, as you can imagine. Tyler Sigmund, the co-founder of the game design director at Red Hook Studios, with regards to the retroactive application of the scummy scumbaggery, Tyler says, to change a fee model that applies to existing games is the equivalent of you leasing a car under certain terms, and then the leasing company sends you a letter informing you that you will now be charged money each time you start the car. I think it's a pretty good analogy.
Nice.
And prior to that, about the larger issue, Patrick Morgan, the studio's lead at Seattle's Galvanic Games, says because revenue and profit aren't taken into consideration with the per install fee, there's a possibility that for smaller studios, the installation fees cost more than the total revenue of the game. So imagine creating a game, it's really popular, and it makes you go into debt because of these runtime fees that are implemented by Unity. It should be said that it is pretty unclear as how Unity can accurately track these installations. So they've claimed that certain types of sales, such as charity bundles and installations resulting from piracy, would be exempted, but they've offered no clear explanation as to how they would be able to differentiate these or prevent the system from being weaponized against developers who have included controversial content like pronouns or just general human decency. You see a lot of these types of attempts at coordinated attacks at brands and games and things like that, especially games, when anything like main character is black or something, or pronouns are used, or, lady doesn't have huge jugs, any of these horrific acts of depravity occur, God forbid. You see a lot of times coordinated attacks by fascists to try to hurt these developers. And so it's possible that this could be one of those avenues that they could take. As a result of everything that I've said, many developers are rebelling in different ways. They're, publicly speaking about these oppressive terms on social media, and saying that they'll boycott the company either immediately or in the future. There's also campaigns to boycott the Unity Unite conference in Amsterdam. It's coming up in November 15th. I know from my own dealings, some developers I know are extremely worried, don't really know what to do. This is a really scary time for a lot of indie devs because, they're an indie developer. They're not part of like a larger kind of like workplace where they can like unionize against their employer. This is like a really really shitty move made by a company whose technology is pretty ubiquitous in the industry. So it's very worrisome. So yeah, that's what's going on in Unity. They suck. But speaking of things that don't suck, can you tell me what's going on in California?
That was a flawless transition. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
I'm just so glad I could witness that.
I'm super well read up on this story, so I'm gonna tell you exactly what's written down because I don't need to learn anything else more about it. But this is about a California legislator granting unemployment to striking workers, which is very, very, very interesting and awesome news. So labor unions have already scored several huge wins in California state legislature. Can I say that properly? Legislature. They landed a major deal to raise fast food wages to $20 an hour, convinced lawmakers to pass a bill requiring driverless trucks to have a human safety driver, and persuaded the legislature to send Governor Gavin Newsom a bill giving all workers in California a minimum of 5 paid sick days. Only 3 are required. Now on Gavin Newsom's desk is a bill passed by the California Senate that provides unemployment benefits to striking workers. And he has until October 14th to decide which of the hundreds of bills the legislature sent him in the final weeks of the session, which will become law. So this is actually huge. I was lying before. I'm going to read a little bit more about this. This is really, really huge. And the Los Angeles Times has done a piece about this that has, sort of like given people a bit of a shock, really. And it's really interesting because of course it's like it proves that union action works. It proves that strike action works, and it's getting like so much media time that something like the Los Angeles Times, the LA Times is actually covering it. Because, as far as I know, the LA Times is not good. It's one of the not good media journalist companies. And sort of like on the same, I think it's like the same company owns the Washington Post or something or another.
Friends of the show, by the way.
Yeah, friends of the show. They love us. They actually love us. So it's really, really interesting. It's saying things like...
Oh, sorry. I think
No, go ahead.
What I think is great is, because I'm looking at those articles too, and I love how much... I don't know if they're trying to, kind of give bias the Republicans, or if they're trying to slam the Republicans, because they keep quoting the Republicans' opinions of this, and all of the quotes are really funny. Republican of Bakersfield, Senator Shannon Grove, says the fourth branch of government in this Capitol building, she said, referring to the labor unions, has little bit too much power this year. It's amazing. Also, Assembly Member Bill Asaley, who's a Republican, also said in the Assembly floor that this was fundamentally unfair to businesses, since the state would in essence be taking the side of striking union members during a labor dispute, saying, by doing this, we're giving one side an advantage. You're subsidizing with tax dollars the labor side. And so somebody in the chat, I believe the witches in the chat, was saying that this is basically like the state funding a strike fund, which is pretty cool. pretty based, pretty awesome. Yeah, and it's funny because I hate the fact that you always get, like, it's funny that we were talking before, you were mentioning people who get mad
at like people who put pronouns in video games. That one particular individual actually mentioned California as like the woke state. So like it's kind of like relating to this a little bit. It's like, oh, California's just getting like woker and woker, and it's just like, well, here's the thing though, it's really not. It's like, this is just like very basic stuff. You know, we again should not be like congratulating Democratic councillors, senators, whatever in whatever state for like doing the very, very bare minimum to protect workers. It's still good news, don't get me wrong, but again, it's like a victory in an ongoing war, right? It's like a victory, one battle that we've won, and maybe we may not even actually get this because the governor has to actually sign it, right? The governor has to actually like approve it. So depending on what kind of,
waiting on that. So
yeah,
we'll
so
see.
so what kind? So I mean, it sounds like it's talking about this in the LA Times. It's saying so far Newsom's administration has argued that requiring human drivers in robotic trucks would hamper innovation and competitiveness, and he's been cautiously taking sides in the Hollywood strikes, and he's repeatedly said he won't sign bills that impose costs for the state. So it's like, you know, he is not like the big cool guy who's being based and like, oh, it's really good if we just,
No, he's a Democrat.
you know, he's a Democrat. It's like, you know, you're not gonna get any kind of progressiveness by like doing labor for this guy, or like carrying out campaigns to like get people to vote for the Democrats. It's just that you're not doing anything. You know, at the very, very least, it's I guess like a modicum of harm reduction, possibly. But again, that's arguable, considering the fact that when, you know, Republicans inevitably get back into administration, they will just remove, using fucking executive orders, any good stuff that the Democrats have done. So again, Red Planet's position on electoral politics remains that it is cringe and not based. So there you go. But that's the update. That's the update on the big old.
Thanks for the California update.
What we California. So Sophie, tell us
our
about
official Californian correspondent, DJ Mule from England.
Yeah. Speaking of England, Sophie's going to tell us about a nonce.
Yeah. Well, Kira, you were wondering about what a nonce was, so let's talk about Russell Brand. Were you aware of Russell Brand before?
Yes, he's an actor. He's in one of my
he's
favorite...
originally a stand-up comedian.
Okay, originally stand-up comedian. He was in one of my favorite movies, or was one of my favorite movies, Forgetting Sarah Marshall. I watched that movie like a million times. He was like the douchey guy.
Wow.
And I also know I also know that like now he's like this weird conspiracy guy on YouTube. Yes.
Right. Well, so, okay, this is, thank you for mentioning that. He's been going to the right for a while. And a lot of people have pointed this out. Like, this has probably been knowing that this was coming. Because, I mean, you know, you look at Louis C.K. or whatever, that guy's comedy was like, I don't know if we'd call it woke or whatever. It's certainly like wasn't revolutionary, but it was like, you know, to the left of whatever. And then he was outed as being a sex creep, and then he came back and immediately was talking about pronouns. And so Russell Brand's been doing this like
tale of all time, honestly,
like conspiracy, like. It's you know the kind of guy who is very spiritual and appeals to a lot of broad ideas of like being tolerant of everyone, and in that way comes across a little bit like a leftist to people, but then is like anti-vaccine and in the conspiracy space, and frequently chats with like raging transphobes and like conservative politicians and shit. And it's like, well, that's just a right winger who's doing some like hippie aesthetics. That's very much the space has been in for a while. So the news coming out yesterday, I think was when it broke, is that Russell Brand has been accused by multiple women of and I mean, this is like much bigger than just the multiple women who've been interviewed for the investigation, but because it seems that it's been an open secret is the term that people are using for a long time. That he's just a horrible piece of shit, basically. The article is worth being careful before you have a read of it, especially if you have any trauma around this kind of subject, and if you have any if you're liable to get triggered by reading about this stuff. It gets pretty heavy. There's some stuff that's like, I mean, to put it simply, these allegations describe Brand engaging in just about every horrible abuser, predator behavior, and groomer behavior under the sun. I mean, it details a relationship that he had with a 16-year-old girl.
When he was 31, by the way.
When he was 31, yeah. It talks about him sending a taxi to pick her up from school, like taking her out of classes. It talks about him getting her to change his contact name in her phone so her parents wouldn't know. Honestly, just like the allegations detail him behaving in absolutely every textbook abuser and predator way, both to adults and a child. So worth being careful before you have a read of that. I feel it's worth commenting on because it's we are in this perpetual struggle to see any kind of feminist justice come about in society. And the outing of high-profile sex predators is a part of that, like pointing out how much patriarchy continues to prop up not just men generally and give men privilege and positions of power in society, but specifically how it props up the absolute worst conceivable men that other men find horrifying. And yet somehow they're getting the power and the fame and the money. Isn't that strange? It's almost like the system was designed by them to do exactly this.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to recognize about this is that this dispatches show. So there are like so many layers to this, right? Like Channel 4 have consistently hosted Russell Brand as like a presenter of multiple things. He's worked for them like over and over in the past.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because they were the ones that they
did the show.
They're the ones that did the big.
This is extremely comparable to Jimmy Savile being outed. It's just that people our age would be less familiar directly with having watched Jimmy Savile, whereas Russell Brand's someone whose shows we've actually watched.
Yeah. So to put this into perspective for the Americans, so Channel 4 is a like, I guess, a channel.
It would be like
in the UK, right?
Yeah, what's like the kind of artsy but still very liberal channel in the States? Would
NBC?
Like PBS or something, or
maybe
something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Showtime, maybe, I don't know. It's like PBS. That. It's like PBS kind of shit. It's a major network in the UK. Producer is saying it would be like ABC, basically.
Okay, so they're the ones that have been hosting him, but then they also just released this documentary, right? That was like the big bombshell. I think the Times revealed did an article about him like right before the Channel 4 documentary, but apparently what I've been reading is the Channel 4 made a documentary about how like horrible Russell Brand is, and they've been prepping it for some time. So that's really interesting. I didn't know that extra piece, that they were actually the hosts for hosted him all the time, and then they do this. Yeah. That's interesting.
Well, it's worth saying in the investigation as well. They talked extensively about like staff who work for Channel 4 quoted as saying, we felt like we were pimps for him. They were essentially like in a process constantly of like inviting good-looking women who are like in the audience of shows to like come hang out with him after. Just like sort of finding women for him to abuse. And like again, this is just like very, very, very similar to the allegations that came out about Jimmy Savile after his death, just the open secret of it and the institutional nature of it, and the way that like people who were on payroll for these big media institutions were being like their paid time was being used to further like sexual abuse.
I just want to like get the sort of listeners' sort of heads into this, because Russell Brand, like for me, I'm not sure if this is going to be the same for you, Sophie, because I know I'm a bit older than you, but specifically remember when Russell Brand started like doing the rounds, and he was doing like you know, panel shows and stuff, and he was appearing in these various things. His whole thing was like, his whole comedy bit, like his comedy personality was how he'd like done a lot of drugs and had sex with a lot of women.
Yeah,
that was the whole thing. And I wasn't that much of a feminist back then, but I knew straight away that was cringe as shit. Like, and he wasn't being fucking, you know what I mean? He definitely wasn't being like real. He wasn't like being relatable. And he's like a rather sort of like, I don't know. I don't want to like. I don't want to gatekeep, but like, you know, he's just like a very like foppish, dandy, metrosexual guy. Like,
it's just kind of like again, to keep on making the Jimmy Savile comparison. It's just like guy who's like in the public eye in the UK who gives nonce vibes for years and years. This is what I mean. Turns out to be a nonce. Wow, we're all apparently sincerely really surprised about this.
See, this is what really, as like a survivor of like being abused by people with audiences, that I still haven't spoken up about because of all the pressure that like my pessimism about like how nothing, I don't feel like anything would ever come of it except getting my life be made worse. You know, when I see things like this, it really, really hurts. It hurts to see somebody so publicly being who they are, like this person, and yet people applaud them and they just get more fans and they get more adoration, and nothing ever occurs unless these victims come together in a coordinated documentary. Like, and even then, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people.
Well, and now you have all
this.
these,
We see
Andrew Tate and Elon Musk have already
run. Andrew Tate and Elon Musk have already run to his defenses. So that's that.
Well, I have. Oh, sorry, Soph.
Well, I was just going to say, there's another. There is one more horrible British story I want to jump onto in a second, but like I have two things I really want to point to. If people do decide to read the article. One is they talk a little bit in the Times article about his reputation as a womanizer, his reputation as having slept with lots of women, exactly like Neil mentioned. And I think that it's worth saying, like, this could go either way for people, and like people who are trying to support him would probably try and read this as like, yeah, women love him or whatever. But I think it's just worth pointing out this as a pattern, that like a lot of guys who are like this will use like the power they have to get themselves like forcibly presented as like a guy who sleeps with lots of women, so that it seems less weird to people that they're constantly fixated on preying on women.
And I was just going to very, very quickly mention, you know, the fact that this has been brewing in media circles for the last week. Someone mentioned it, and Russell Brand immediately started streaming about it, saying, this is a conspiracy.
Well, then he went and did a comedy live show, actually.
And he says it's a conspiracy against him.
That's literally what he's saying. It's so vile, and it's like oh, you literally know better than Andrew Tate, and he just and again, to mention, it's very, very clearly on display that if you are some kind of like under some kind of illusion that like cancel culture can actually like ruin these men's careers, or like, you know, getting Me Too'd is going to destroy their lives. He was doing comedy shows last night in London to thunderous applause. The audience was all still there. He's not going to lose any money. That's the end.
I mean, I hope he does. I hope he loses fucking everything. He seems like
we all do.
Monster.
We all do. But we have to make.
And this is the other thing I wanted to quickly say to wrap it up, is that you know, I think we've had discussions about justice on the show, where we talked to Cradle Community, and then we read their book, and we talked about transformative justice. And like, in processing some of this stuff and reading the article earlier today, I was posting about this on Blue Sky a bit. Like, I think that it's really worth us holding space for the existence of guys like this, who it's such a constant pattern of behavior over so many years, and they have no interest in changing, that functionally we can just say they're not going to change. And we just know that's a person who exists, right? And also hold space for the idea that people can change. The reason it's important for the latter is absolutely categorically not to say Russell Brand could change. Fuck that guy. Get in the sea. But for all of the insecure and cowardly men who are now defending him, I think it's really worth saying, like, I think a lot of these guys, they've probably treated women badly, right, at some point in their life, maybe currently, maybe historically, and they feel like they are the same as him, and being
Absolutely.
and people acting like, well, that's even the thing. Like, it's not that we or our people are acting like people can't change, but people like him will absolutely rely on the idea that, like, if he is allowed to be held accountable by feminists, by people who care about women for his actions, then every other man who's ever treated women badly ever in any way will also be held will be punished exactly the same. And yeah, I think that it's important for us to hold space for, like, people like this are fucking monsters who are not going to change, and also that the majority of people, given the right social environment and that we all spread, feminist consciousness in the population and love and understanding, will do better.
100%.
All right, we've got a couple of minutes, and I just wanted to quickly explain RAAC to Kira. Kira, have you heard about this?
No.
All right, this is a quick one. So British schools are collapsing. It's going really well. In a moment of just, like, the metaphors and mood of the political moment in the country just becoming absolutely physical, it turns out that reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, RAAC, which is a building material that's been really popular in the UK since the mid-50s. It turns out it can just fall apart. Turns out it can just completely crumble. And it's been known for a while, but they haven't been doing anything about it because, it's only used in, like, schools or whatever. So why worry about it?
UK is famous for two things: hating children and being TERFs.
Yeah. Well, this is a great moment of the perfect conflict, right? The unstoppable force of how much the UK hates children, hitting the immovable object of a voter base who love saying "think of the children," and so there is massive public outcry for someone to do something about this situation, and also massive public outcry to definitely do nothing about this situation because fuck them kids. Kira, any questions about the UK and how much we hate kids?
No, I think y'all really hate kids.
Yeah.
I think one of the if you want to see something that is a little bit of comic relief related to this, you could go ahead and Google Rachel Reeves, who was caught on a hot mic getting really mad that no one ever praises politicians when they do good stuff. After being questioned why
I remember that.
Her political party haven't done anything to stop schools falling apart on the heads of children.
Also,
young children as well, not even shitty
like
teenagers.
primary
schools, babies.
Also, if you want to, that's for a laugh. If you want to just feel good in general, you should head over to patreon.com/red_planet.
That's true. That will make you feel good.
Yeah, we want to remind everyone that Red Planet is made possible by the direct support of our viewers and listeners.
Yeah.
And so for just as low as $2 a month, and we can talk about the different tiers later in the show, but just as low as $2 a month, you can support us on Patreon. And we'd like to expand by hiring an editor to help us produce more shareable clips and create all new content. So please head on over for some immediate feel-good dopamine and just become a patron.
I think it's also worth mentioning, we also have some exclusive content going up there. We, as we mentioned earlier, limited hangouts, but just to tell the listeners and viewers what that is. Limited hangout is an intelligence community term for when the government publishes a bunch of classified documents to feed the conspiracy community a bunch of shit, but not enough for them to be able to draw any serious conclusions. Just, a limited hangout. And that's what we're having, is a limited hangout where Conrad and I, and sometimes other Red Planet hosts, chat about conspiracy theories. We talk about the reality, and we talk about how conspiracy beliefs work, and then we talk about what those wacky, kooky conspiracy theorists believe. And the first episode is about Bill Gates, and the second episode is about the Democrats. I think it's pretty good little spin-off show. So check it out.
So, are you doing an intro for our guest, Sophie? Because you know most about them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Amar's cool.
That works. There it is.
Okay, fine. Amar. I know Amar from going to several different. Conrad is getting really pissed off with us right now. I know our guest Amar from a lot of different causes and protests. They are a sparkling organizer and activist, and we're really lucky to have them here on the show. They recently were given a we'll talk about it in a second, but basically they were slapped with some of the new police powers that the Met Police have been given against protests, and so they're here to talk to us today about the state of protest and dissent in the UK and how it all is. And I mean, it's bad is the short version, but Amar, how's it going, babe?
Hey, hon, I'm hungover, but good apart from that.
Iconic. Do you want to tell us about so I mean, one thing I know you're involved with is LGSM?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so Lesbians and Gay Support the Migrants, it was the first group that I joined. It's how I got involved in organizing. It's where I became an abolitionist. And it's built on this, long-standing tradition of queer solidarity with other marginalized groups. So back during the miners' strike, there was a group called Lesbians and Gay Support the Miners. If any of you have seen the film Pride, which I think everybody has, that's about that group, who are kind of the inspiration behind LGS migrants. And so what we do is a mix of campaigning work, fundraising, and direct action. And it's built on the idea that, as queer people, historically, our communities have been, brutalized and criminalized by the state in the same way that asylum seekers and migrants are being criminalized and targeted now. And so it's a solidaristic group, essentially. And the actions that we do kind of range from campaigning to fundraising to direct actions. I think one thing that's been quite interesting and sobering is that maybe historically, near when the group was founded, maybe there was a bit more of a sense that the trajectory of civil rights for queer people was definitely kind of, advancing with a particular kind of teleology to it, like it was getting better. And so it was very much like, oh, but we remember how it used to be, so we're going to show solidarity with asylum seekers and migrants. One thing that's quite sobering is that, as we can see, migrants and asylum seekers are one pole of like the targeting by fascists and the government at the moment. And trans people and queer people by extension are now the other end of that pole. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, speaking of queer and trans people being targeted, we've talked a little bit on the show in regular news segments about the Posey Parker and Honor Oak demos, which tend to be the ugly stepsisters of British protests at the moment. They're usually on the same weekend, one day after the other. Posey Parker obviously draws a tiny crowd because she's just the she in J.K. Rowling. But a bunch of fascists have been showing up to Honor Oak Pub to get really mad at a drag time story hour. And you were there against them sometime. But it wasn't a good time. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, no, a good time it certainly was not. I guess you probably already chatted about this. I know you have, in fact, but as a bit of a refresher. So we've had Turning Point UK, which is a far-right, centre-right, they maintain, actually. I think they successfully got someone who reported on them to correct the record that they're in fact a centre-right group, not a far-right one. They're inspired by Turning Point in the US. So, all of the kind of bingo card is
Thanks,
checked.
Kira.
Yeah. anti-abortion, like anti-choice, and anti all of the things. We know the rule book, right? And so they called a demo in February outside a pub called the Honor Oak Pub, against Drag Queen Story Hour, which was going on there. Local people turned up in massive numbers. There were like 900 of us against like 40 very sad-looking far-right people, including the fake vicar, Calvin Robinson.
Yeah, Calvin Robertson, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, the fake brigadier, you know, Lawrence Fox, all of that lot. But they've been coming back month after month, and there's been ongoing community resistance to that. And you know, the resistance has been local. It's been local people. But increasingly, whereas initially it was kind of your
this is if it's okay to cut in, this is like, speaking of, like, you know, sort of like local communities, when these fash are always going off about like traditional values and faith and stuff, you know, they got their fake vicar Calvin Robertson on their side, and there was an actual vicar of a local church near Honor Oak who spoke out in favor of trans people and condemned the actions of the fash, and someone, we can all make up our minds about who, smeared human shit all over the door of the church. So, you know, that's how much these guys value, I guess, local communities and British traditions and all that.
Yeah, real classy. Like, they're not even doing like Christian nationalism with respect to like Christ anymore. But yeah, so Honor Oak protests have been ongoing. There's been fluctuations, you know, between I think 300 to 900 on our side, and between maybe 30 to 100 on their side, and it's been fluctuating. And it was in June, I think on the 24th of June, that I was there. Earlier in the day, before I arrived, there had been violence, or I should say, Nazis had attacked local people outside the pub. So, you know, a pub window was smashed by projectiles. You know, multiple people were concussed. So there had been this like horrific, genuinely horrific.
Well, in fact, Ada, who we've had on the show.
Yeah.
If people remember our Quicker episode with Ada Cable.
Absolute angel, that one. Absolute angel. But yeah, after the attack had happened, cops showed up, separated the groups. By the time I arrived, it was just us lot facing off against them lot behind some barriers. A sound system arrived to drown out the homophobic slurs that they were shouting. At some point, as happened every month, you know, the crowd took the street. The fash were further away from the pub than they had been. That was a massive win, so they can't intimidate the kids, they can't intimidate the parents. Sound system's out, I'm wearing a bra, my ass looks great, we're having a dance, and then the police decide 40 minutes before the close of the demonstration that actually this is now no longer a protest, it's a party, that now actually it's causing serious disruption, even though they'd opened one side of the traffic. So I get nicked pretty quickly and thrown into a van, and she now has a record. So that's fun.
Sorry, babe. And this is so this has as I was saying, this is actually the new police powers from the PCSC bill, isn't it? This is public nuisance.
Yeah, so it's a breach of Section 14, which is when conditions are imposed on a protest while it's ongoing. And that goes back to the old Public Order Act 1986.
Right.
The reason that the Section 14 conditions, which was to get off the road and shut off the music, the reason those were upheld in court as being lawful is because of the redefinition under the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act of serious disruption to mean anything that's more than minor, and on the necessity for the cops to take into account impacts on anyone who might be affected by the protest, rather than just, you know, the local community or residents or anything like that. So yeah, it's a breach of an older law, but the reason the conditions themselves were upheld in court as lawful is because of the PCSC Act.
And this is like, I don't have a complete understanding of it, but like the ways that the powers have been given recently, like this affects your ability to go to future protests, does it not?
Actually, so there weren't conditions put on like my bail, and there weren't any conditions attached, which is lucky, but that's also not saying much, like once someone has been arrested, they are known to the police, there is a high likelihood of being arrested. And I think it's probably important to say as well, like, yeah, this is a result of new innovations in terms of policing law. But the basis of it, which is the arbitrariness of the cops' ability to just nab whoever they want, that's kind of been consistent since the dawn of policing powers way back when, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight that just in general. It's like, yeah, we have these new awful bills going around Parliament, going around, like, that have been passed, and like there's amendments that they want to make to the legislation and stuff. But it's look, it's just because they're getting more scrutiny that they're doing this stuff. This kind of thing has been absolutely happening, as you say. Amar, just like since the fucking dawn of the police, like, just do whatever the fuck they want. Like that's the thing that you have to remember.
Yeah. Let's not take the liberal position here. It's not the PCSC bill is like, oh no, so bad. The police, they shouldn't have that much power. They should just have this. No.
Yeah, when you hear about like cases like I can't remember the fella's second name, but there's a fella called Kevin who was simply arrested and charged with murder because he knew someone who got murdered.
This is the joint enterprise.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Manchester is a kind of hotbed of application of this thing. Get someone's been charged, and then they just get their mate and charge them with the exact same crime. Yeah,
literally. And it's like this happened way before the PCSC or whatever, police crime sentencing bill. Went through. So yeah, spot on.
I think with that one as well, it's important to note, the kind of direction in terms of convictions for joint enterprise cases, right? Like, it's not a coincidence that the infrastructure to try primarily young black men and gangs was preceded by the establishment of Manchester's equivalent of London's, now disabled apparently gangs matrix, and the construction of a multi-million-pound courthouse by Andy Burnham up in Manchester. So it's no surprise that once the infrastructure has been built, curiously, suddenly there are loads of black men who are actually, jointly responsible, supposedly, for the murder of their friends, right?
Well, could you just mentioned the gangs matrix? Could you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, so the gangs matrix in London is theoretically, it's been, I think, deconstructed. I need to check that though. Was a way of basically mapping people that the state considered to be suspicious, and this was done just on the basis of social groups, of listening to drill music, of like people knowing each other and being related to one another. Given the profiling of young black men in particular already, not a massive shock that the gangs matrix just completely like expanded this out, right? And so basically it's an infrastructural tool of profiling, which is then being used to link people up together for joint enterprise convictions.
In a very real sense, it's just mapping black communities. Like it's just the state saying, we're going to make black communities really legible to us. We know this guy's mates with this guy and this guy's mates with this guy. So then anytime we can arrest someone, we can get another one.
Yeah, it's like if Paul Mason was employed by the government and we knew he was employed by the government,
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the current leadership of the Labour Party, because we were just chatting about the RAAC scandal that's going on with schools falling down on children and no one giving a fuck / cheering, because that's how much Britain hates kids. And Labour have been absolutely useless about this, as they've been on so many things. And then they've also been quite particularly horrible about migrants under Keir Starmer's leadership. Just this week we've had Starmer saying that people who are coming across the channel in small boats should be treated like terrorists attacking the nation, if I'm remembering correctly how he said. I'm loving Kira's face throughout this, by the way, as we just like go through point by point of current British politics, and she's finding out how it's going. And we mentioned joint enterprise. Obviously, Starmer himself was head of the Crown Crown Prosecution
Service.
Yeah, and so it's like a lot of this stuff is either the current Labour leadership doesn't give a fuck, or their favorite boy, their favorite square-headed man, was actually directly involved in like a lot of this horrible injustice. I think it's worth opening up a bit of discussion with what what we're aware of with your involvement in protests so far, and your new sexy cool criminal record. That like we talk about like Labour, who are supposed to be on the side of Labour for one, but like the left, and how that relates to protest at the moment, because like we don't have a party in mainstream politics who are really on our side, and I guess like Starmer as top cop is unlikely to come in and after the next general and like take away these police powers, if we're being realistic. So what are your thoughts and feelings about like how, like where we're at with protest with Labour, with there being no electoral voice for the left?
Yeah, I mean, it's not good, is it? Right? Like this is the guy who, during the 2011 Tottenham uprising, introduced the idea of 24-hour courts so more kids could get sent to jail more efficiently. I think one girl got 6 months for stealing a bottle of water. So this is what we're dealing with here, right? And Starmer's Labour has really doubled down on the law and order rhetoric, right? And even I think he was on Good Morning Britain, or one of those kind of TV shows that like no one actually watches because we don't watch television anymore. He was asked about the decision around Clapham Common, in which the two women who had been arrested quite violently at the vigil for Sarah Everard were given payouts by the Met Police. And he was careful to kind of caveat this by saying, instinctively anyone could tell that doing that was wrong. But where does Keir Starmer stand on, removing police powers? He's been asked repeatedly if he's going to undo some of the legislation that he supposedly opposed while it was being passed, like the PCSC Act, like the Public Order Act. And the answer is no, or silence, which we can take to be no, right? And in terms of where that leaves us, I think the sad truth is that I am someone who believes that there is a necessary engagement with electoralism on the basis that there can be some mitigation to these kind of laws that see vast waves of people criminalized. If we look at where Labour is at, it doesn't look like that is forthcoming. The left within Labour even, doesn't seem to be in a position where it's able or willing to mobilise itself to cause serious problems in the interest of mitigating state violence, right?
Yeah, I mean, Wes Streeting, Starmer's favorite little dude, recently said you should stop protesting for us to be a better opposition and start protesting for us to be a better government, i.e. he's so confident that Labour will win that we all, us loony lefties who want things like human rights and enough food to eat and for schools to not fall down on babies, should start getting mad at Labour in a new way, which is getting ready for them to be in charge.
Yeah, and do you know what? I will never say this again. Streeting's correct in that one sense, right? Which is that is a terrain that we need to be preparing for, right? Like, I'm personally not convinced that lobbying Starmer on literally anything. And you can talk to people who work in the left think tanks about what lobbying around energy or climate policies has done. Every single thing has been rolled back on. Every single thing has been watered down, right? So yeah, we do need to get ready to be resisting a Labour version of what we currently have now in government. And I think what that looks like really is acknowledging that, whereas historically when we talk about militancy in terms of protests, we were talking about some fucking mad shit, we're talking about Battle of the Beanfield, we're talking about Angry Brigade. Where we are at right now is that militancy is a relative category, in terms of your proximity to criminalization, which means that unfortunately walking slowly down a road is militant these days, right? Now, in terms of what that means for us, people are going to continue protesting, right? Like, it's not the case that as every single thing gets increasingly criminalized, people are necessarily going to sit down and take it. So I don't think it's necessarily a call as to like, oh, do we still protest or do we not? people are gonna do that, and they're gonna do it in forms of like capital P protests, and they're gonna do it in the form of insurrections, that will be termed riots, for example, like we saw in Tottenham in 2011. So the real question for us, I think, is how do we build an infrastructure to support people who are going to be facing that violence and criminalization? And that looks more like care work and training and upskilling, right? So that looks like making sure that if you have bust cards, you take them to demos and give them out. That means sharing information with people who are going to protest for the first time. It means making sure that we're volunteering to do arrestee support for when people are coming out of the NIC. It means making sure we're volunteering to do court support. It means making sure that we're fundraising, for people's legal costs, or even just their living costs when their lives are negatively affected by criminalization. So I think that, in a way, that kind of has to be the focus of where we're at in terms of, like leftists, I suppose.
Yeah, it would be very, very based for people to start mutual aid groups specifically around that. Just because of absolutely everything that you've said. And I think as well, though, again, upping that kind of awareness of prison abolition, upping that awareness of, police abolition. I think a lot of the time people hear about prison abolition and they just can't get that, thought in their head, but what about the murderers? What about the rapists? And we've just got to drill it into their heads. Prisons are not full of murderers and rapists. They get away with their crimes all the fucking time. They're full of petty offenders who are then institutionalized.
Most women in the UK prison system are in there for not paying their TV license.
Yeah, a third of women, right? Yeah, and or maybe might even be 2/3. I don't know, but just completely absurd. But I think that just sort of raising awareness of the power of the state and what the state wants. And I think you're spot on with the trying to lobby Labour for anything. There is this just particular I don't know what you would call it. It is brain poisoning it to a degree. It's like how can you possibly think that there is any chance of lobbying Keir Starmer to do anything like these? You turned on everything, all of his election promises when he was elected to be leader of the party. Every single thing that he said that was remotely left wing. Why do you think for a second that lobbying is going to do anything? This generally comes from older trade union leftists who are used to a sort of comfortable, I guess, relationship to the Labour Party, where the Labour Party is well, we know that they're pretty neoliberal. We know that they've, there was the whole thing under Tony Blair of the House of Lords scandal and whatever, paying for what was it? Paying for peerages, cash for peerages, and all that stuff. But they did some good stuff. They raised the minimum wage, and they did this and they did that. So the next time a Labour government comes in, they'll probably do some good stuff with the bad stuff as well. And it's how do we tell them that there's no guarantee of that? How do we?
Well, so I guess I agree, right? But I also want to problematize it a little bit, because I suppose that there does exist some modicum of leverage through the trade unions, right? Now, the tricky thing, and I think we saw this with the TUC conference, which happened, I think, last year, you heard different noises coming from different trade unionists, right? Ranging from Mitt Lynch and Sharon Graham, who also said, we're reacting in slightly different ways to Angela Rayner's supposed, revolutionary deal for workers. I think Graham is going about it in a very interesting way, where she's diverting funds that would have gone to the Labour Party and funneling them into what she's calling, red wall towns, to basically do campaigning, doorstep campaigning around issues like energy and around nationalisation, so that when Starmer goes to those same red wall seats, he's going to be faced with local people. Actually, the electorate, the focus groups are going to be demanding something different. And I think there's something to be said for that, right? Whereas whatever the limitations of electoralism, and we know there are many, if you find yourself in a position where you are a key node of the financing of the Parliamentary Labour Party, you can do something with that. And actually, I think Mitt Lynch's appearances in the press, becoming a household name, has gone some way to showing that you can do that a little bit. But I guess also it's if I go off too long, do interrupt me. It's the ADHD brain, hon.
No, babe, you're honestly like we're gonna have you back like once every month. You're nailing it. This is fantastic.
Oh my God, amazing. I passed the test. I've been reading Aaron Kanani's book recently, which is called What is Anti-Racism and Why is it Anti-Capitalist, right? And when I first saw the title, I was like, I feel like I know that, honestly. But it's a very, very good book in terms of charting the history of how race and racism is conceptualized, right? And one of the really important points in it is, I think, this tendency that Starmer, and, Kanani doesn't explicitly name Starmer in this, but this tendency that Starmer represents, which is, doubling down on law and order, doubling down on antisocial behavior, doubling down on the border, right? It reflects a wider anxiety that has historically been true about neoliberalism's funneling of wealth from the global south into the global north, and in particular into Britain, formed the basis of the post-war welfare consensus, right? Like, we got our welfare state off the backs of the extractivism in the global south. Neoliberalism then comes in as a way of disciplining these newly independent nations, that are demanding, redistribution of wealth, who have workers' movement, that are threatening Western puppets that are put in there. But there's nowhere for people in the global south at the tail end of, the privatization of agriculture in India, for example, or what they're attempting to do across Africa as well. There is nowhere for people who are being proletarianized supposedly in the global south to go, which is creating the conditions that lead to what is being termed the migrant crisis. At the same time, we've got this whole underclass that's been created within Britain of people who cannot get secure work, and actually the system cannot give them secure, well-waged work. So you have kind of internally alienated or displaced communities, and you have that, at a global level as well. What Starmer represents is like, the crystallization of the anxiety of what it means for every single, piece of welfare that as leftists, we are advocating for, being predicated on the existence and the oppression of these communities, both internally within Britain and also globally, right? So I think it can be easier at a discursive level, I think, to talk about Starmer as like a cop or like a racist in a way that maybe other people weren't. We also need to think at a structural level, like, don't get me wrong, Jeremy Corbyn, absolute boy. How
also
much
wanted to fund the police more, so,
Exactly, right? There are structural reasons why the Labour Party cannot go far enough in the direction we want, and we have to only relate to it, if we do relate to it, as a potential damage mitigating measure, right?
It's literally exactly what I was saying about the Democrats in the USA just a while ago. Yeah, 100%.
Cool. No, I think you hit it out of the park. Well, I mean, so shall we talk more about like labor on a structural level then? Like something that Nat likes to point out is like political technologies that are deployed like effectively without revolution, like you can't actually take any political technology away. And that's something that, like, if we think about Blair bringing in like ASBOs, like that's a political technology. That's a technology of policing. And like, so that's a thing that's in the mainstream. It's in the policy environment. It's in the consciousness now. It's never going away. And so like this is something that I think we like should always frame a discussion of the Labour Party as it exists right now, because like again, like Corbyn was good for a bunch of reasons, but also wanted to fund a bunch more police, and it's like that comes down to yeah, I mean, it doesn't just like a lot of people think that like the platforms that politicians run on just come down to like what will be popular, and it doesn't just come down. I mean, obviously, British people do have British brain, the worst mental disease known to man. But like this, it doesn't just come down to like British people loving cops. It comes down to like there can't really be a leader of the Labour Party who's saying like we're going to get in and we're going to like radically reshape what the police mean. We're not going to like there just isn't going to be a Labour leader who comes in and says like we're actually going to have less cops, because fundamentally one of the like undergirding technologies here is like always more everything, and one of the always mores is always more cops.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. And I guess if we were to think about, you know, what it might mean to build towards a popular constituency of people who'd be significant enough that they might be able to make those demands to that effect, you know, to a potential hypothetical good Labour leader down the line, if, you know, the world isn't burning by then. What that would look like is, you know, actually trying to provide infrastructures at a local level and systems of care that are able to do what people currently are taught that the police and that prisons do, right? And so, like, that means, and I think, you know, I meet so many amazing comrades who have like really good analysis, you know, and you know, in terms of their politics strategically, like they're doing a hell of a lot. And this hyper local stuff, I think, often doesn't always get seen as capital P political in the same way that, you know, like getting nicked at an anti-fascist protest might do, for example, right? But, you know, when we talk, like, one example of this in Lewisham, which is where I live, they are trying to introduce public space protection orders that would last 3 years and cover the entirety of the borough. So public space protection orders were brought in 2014 as a means of criminalizing antisocial behavior, right? Because apart from a public space protection order, antisocial behavior isn't actually a criminal category. The use of public space protection orders turns it into one within a geographical area within a particular time limit. Now, there's been a campaign called We Keep Us Safe Lewisham, which I'm involved in, and there's also been local councillors, local Labour councillors, who have been resisting the Labour council that has been trying to do this. And, you know, it's still ongoing, the fight against it, but what that has looked like has been, you know, actually at the Honour Oak that I got demo that I got arrested at, you know, there were people going round with a like people's consultation to say, do you want the police to have these powers in your community? And if people said yes, the conversation would then be, why? What do you think it is about this that we need the police to do? There'll be a conversation about what else it might look like. That kind of like hyper localized like political education stuff like helps people conceive about safety in ways that are different to the predominant narrative. And I think as, you know, more and more people get precarious, more and more people get drawn into poverty. I hate saying cost of living crisis because that's just not what's going on, right? It's just the expansion of poverty and the destruction of the erstwhile middle classes, right? As that happens, more people are going to get brought into contact with the antagonisms of capital through the police protecting poverty, and we've seen that with the, you know, furor around the year of the shoplifters. I think the Mirror turned it, right. Those are even what liberals would call crimes of survival. As more and more people experience the sharp end of policing and of prisons and of this law and order rhetoric, there has to be something to draw them into, right? There has to be some community of care. We have to be there on the ground, you know, feeding each other, clothing each other, trying to transform our social relations. That has to be the basis of a political constituency, either that a social democratic Labour leader can capitalise on, or that a revolution can have off the back of, right? Whichever you prefer.
I do think that we should briefly touch on the year of the shoplifters thing. Because maybe this is something that we should have mentioned in the news, but you know, we're not always you know, firing on all cylinders when it comes to every single news piece, and we don't really.
We're just discerning. We just have taste. You know,
that's
what it is.
Taste.
We say some news it's cringe, some news it's based, and we just don't, you know, necessarily want to.
No, if you see someone shoplifting, no, you didn't, innit? Like.
Yeah, right, exactly. So why talk about it?
I would hope that, you know, most of our listeners would know that anyway. But I do think, like, what we're seeing now, in case anyone's not aware, we have an international audience. So just in case anyone doesn't know, in the UK right now, the mainstream media is really firing up against shoplifters because, as Amardeep has rightly pointed out, it's a crime of survival that more and more people are doing because the material conditions they're suffering under neoliberal capitalism are getting worse. And
because of the cosy libs. It's
the cosy libs, basically.
Mule, you wouldn't steal a baby.
You wouldn't steal a baby, apart from when I would. I've stolen multiple babies. This is me coming out.
You wouldn't steal some really expensive cunty platform boots.
Oh, you are so wrong. It's one of those things where we at Red Planet, we've said these things are just going to keep happening. The more and more, the worse and worse that things get for people, the more and more we're going to see these kinds of actions. So what we're seeing in response to that is this horrific demonizing of anything remotely based on anyone trying to grasp at their own living needs, right? So it's exactly the same kind of thing when we saw the pushback. Again, we've spoken about how Corbyn is not necessarily the answer, you know, and while I think that shoplifting, we're going to see more and more of it, but it's the wrong thing and you should never do it because it's illegal and it's bad or whatever. Anyway, but like, you know, at the same time, like Corbyn was not the answer, but he was sort of talking about some things that would have made some people's living conditions a bit better, and the media came down like a ton of bricks on him. Again, same with shoplifting, the things that we're seeing now, and again, also Just Stop Oil. You know, and various other, like Fossil Free London, various other organizations that are doing stuff that absolutely need to happen. And we're just going to see more and more media coming down against that. I think luckily we have millennials and Gen Zs who just don't pay attention to that shit. Yeah. They'll either pay attention to that shit by way of reactionary political twats, Russell Brand, or you know, they'll hear it from people like us and we tell them the truth about it. So, you know, it's kind of one of them, right?
Did you know that Russell Brand is a nonce?
We taught Kira a new word today, Amar, if you couldn't tell. I think I've been you know, full disclaimer, whatever, the law is the arbiter of morality. We don't endorse things that are wrong and bad, like breaking the law. But I think that, like, I've been saying for a while, you know, one of the only good and worthwhile pieces of folklore that's in, like, the people in Britain, like everyone in Britain would know immediately, is Robin Hood, right? And it's just like stealing from the rich to feed the poor, literally, you know, when people would otherwise not survive. I don't think it's that long before we see people like organizing in what the media will absolutely call like hooligan gangs or whatever the fuck, you know, to just go knock over big Tesco's. Like, I really don't think it's that long before we see big Tesco's gets raided by some people who are like making sure that people can fucking survive.
Yeah.
What if and I think at the big Tesco while making pain au chocolat?
What if, Amar? What if? The thing I was going to say was, you know, it's interesting what you said about, like, you know, whether these this organizing and mutual aid like grows into each other in a revolutionary sense, or whether some social democrat labor leader is able to, like, you know, capitalize off it to drive the country in a marginally better direction. It was just interesting to, you know, to hear you say that, because like I was on Knowledge Fight. I think the episode came out this week, and you know, I saw someone who was commenting on the stuff that I said, and it was quite amusing because I'd tried to caveat stuff I'd said carefully to say I'm a materialist, and I want to be careful in saying that because I do want to, like, get past tendencies here and, like, be able to do, you know, like talk about stuff that is obvious and should be clear to anyone who's a materialist. And I followed up that by saying, you know, I am an anarchist. However, I really blah, 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 blah. And, like, I just saw some people complaining online who are just, like, very, very sure that, like, everything I'd said from that point onwards was, like, horribly Anna Kitty brain poisoned. And it was just, like, it's just that, like, I just think it's really important to say that, like, this kind of organizing is, like, it's something that's gonna happen because people need it. It's not just like the strategy that needs to happen. It's the thing that's gonna happen because people need food to live and stuff like that. And B, like, it fits entirely and completely with anyone's revolutionary strategy, because it's just going to be the material conditions people are living with. So if you're a Marxist and you're a vanguardist even, and your whole thing is, you know, you're going to have the Revolutionary Party do the blah blah blah, and then we'll down with the provisional government and so on. Like, great, good for you. It's going to have to interface with this organizing. This organizing is going to exist. It's just gonna.
This is one of my bugbears, actually, because as someone who self-identifies as a communist, you know, I keep having these chats with comrades, you know, and then about how we need to transform social relations and overcome alienation and cultivate these new political constituencies to enable the class to become, a class that is a class for itself, right? The agent of revolutionary change. And then I'm like, but I don't see you lot doing arrestee support. I don't see you lot doing the care work. I don't see you lot taking the minutes. Do you know, it's that kind of, it's like, who's doing that?
Who do you see doing that, Amar? Yeah, that's right, yeah. I see you all having a lot of discussions in the central committee there. I don't see a lot of you at the protest, and I don't see a lot of you at the support. Yeah, it was something actually it's worth saying, arrestee support is something that has been out of the current protest milieu going on, something that has been done pretty well. I remember Nat went down for some arrestee support, and there was one fash. There had been a few people arrested on our side, and there had been a few people, maybe a few of each, and there was one fash who was for a little bit and then fucked off, and otherwise just nobody cared about their side. They had no interest in because to them someone who gets nicked is a weakling who should have done better, and then our side had people who brought food, they brought games, they brought stuff to, they brought spare blankets in case it got cold and all of this. And I just think it's something we're doing well. It's something we could be doing better. But
I think it's just something more people could be doing. Actually, in my experience, we're pretty good at some of this stuff, as a whole. But it is the same relatively small group of people that we see doing this kind of work. And we just, everyone needs to be getting involved in that kind of shit as well, right? I wanted to jump back a little bit in terms of what we were discussing around, shoplifting and around hypothetically people organizing themselves, to, in Marxist terms, disrupt the circulation of commodities, nicking pan and chocolats, and
not paying your rent,
and actually. Actually, no, I will not say that now.
If we talk about not paying your rent too much, Nat's going to storm through from the other room and seize the mic off me.
Yeah, I am here for that. I'm here for Nat coming in, seizing the mic. Oh yeah, seize the means of communication, Nat. Holy shit.
So, yeah, seizing the means of knowledge production. Typical Nat, just typical Nat.
She's coming. She's poking her head through. People listening at home can't see, but she's so tempted. She's so tempted, just like a little gremlin in the back. Here she comes. She's coming right in.
I've got to get some water anyway, so you can just take my headphones for a minute. You can talk about the disrupting of the circulation of commodities.
This fucks so hard.
Because capital circulates or it dies, chat. If you don't know that about capital,
it's just here's the thing that I'm just saying every day is that we have a unique moment of safety in the UK that they have been cutting police budgets. Police are horrible and violent, but we actually have enormous room for movement to do quite radical things with a lot of safety. And not paying your rent is one of those. In the US, if you're being evicted, cops show up with guns to help evict you, potentially. In the UK, the court makes an appointment with the bailiff, and you don't have to let them in. And they have to tell you when they're going to show up.
The only time, and you could probably attest to this, Nat, with LRU actions, when we've done eviction resistances with Greater Manchester Tenants Union, the only time the cops have ever shown up is when it's been a social landlord, social housing landlord, and that's because they are a corporation, basically. So they have a bit more clout to be able to call the police and get them to turn up. Whereas
they're still really only supposed to, obviously cops break the rules all the time, but they're only really supposed to show up if there's a breach of the peace and it looks like there might be a physical fight between the landlord and the tenants.
Yeah.
Capitalism is killing the planet, is causing climate change, is generating the death of ourselves and the systems we rely on. So we need to break the wheel. And the primary fundamental thing is land reform. How do we do that in UK? I think we start with not paying our rent as collectives. We have an enormous window of safety I've been thinking of it like, okay, what if I was to make the personal decision? I'm gonna try and hold out in this location and not pay my rent for a year. I can save £18,000 and I can pay myself to go through all the stress of what that looks like. I can pay myself to deal with court fees. I can go to therapy. I can buy myself little treats. I can hang out with my friends. Because I'm not paying £18,000 of rent. And then what does it look like if that's magnified and you've got a few people getting in on that together? That looks like building dual power potentially. That looks like mutual aid. That looks like creating organisms to replace dependence on the state, because we can put our labor and our time and our resources straight into the things that we choose to, not like 2/3 of it, which is like most of my friends, going straight to the landlord, straight from the ruling class and back up to the ruling class to tell us what to do. I think it's kind of that's what I think. Start paying your rent.
I think that's solid. I also think that an interesting test case for this is,
can I come back on the show, please?
Is in universities, right?
Yeah.
Where like actually students are in a really, really good position actually to be collectively doing rent strike stuff. And there have been some really impressive actions actually that have held out over the last few years across various universities. I think in particular in University of Manchester, right? So
you mean the guy that we had on our show, Red Planet, that you should go and listen and watch if you haven't already? Not you particularly, Amardeep, just anyone listening. If you didn't know, we spoke to one of those guys. Anyway, continue.
I'm gonna let Sophie back on her show now. Thank
Bye,
you.
Nah. I love you.
Bye, Nah.
Bye.
Okay, she's back. Sorry, Amma. Go ahead. What you said? I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's okay. I actually think that was it. There was a point I was going to make before Sophie left. Right. So back to robbing pain au chocolats. So I think it is true to an extent that the British public isn't going to be too fussed about people nicking stuff to survive. But I think that what we have started to see has been the securitization of any work that involves customer service. So you've already seen this, with the fact that it's just like commonplace, across hospitality venues and bars and pubs. It's like CCTV everywhere. Like you have to call the police for certain things. Like there is that securitization happening that is now so kind of normal because it's about apparently protecting workers that we don't really question it. Same thing is now happening to workers in supermarkets, right? So the body cams that have been offered, I think, is it in Asda, to certain workers, and this is actually supposedly Tesco. And we're going to see this, increasingly rolled out because what's happening is that the corporations, that own Tesco's and Sainsbury's and Morrison's and all of that, they are going to make it the problem of workers to say that actually you personally are going to have to stop this shoplifting happening. Otherwise, as a supervisor in the store or as a manager, you are going to personally be responsible for any losses that are incurred. What that's going to precipitate within supermarkets is that supermarket workers are going to find themselves on the front lines of like defending capital from people that are trying to survive. And as soon as that gets couched in the deserving poor because underpaid supermarket worker or cashier versus the poor but undeserving like robber or whatever you call someone who takes pain au chocolats, that is actually a struggle that is quite easy for the media to spin. And actually, I don't know, do we trust the union movement to actually say we're against the securitization, we don't think our workers should be responsible for this, this is at root an issue of systemic inequality? Or are the trade unions going to say, if you want our workers to become cops, pay them more and give them body cams? I don't know what the answer to that is, and I'm quite worried about
absolutely.
it.
I think it is a worrying thing. I think that I think that one thing that stands out to me is how much the workers in those stores will be part of local communities who are suffering and struggling, and therefore like the high likelihood that no matter how the media tries to spin it, of course the figure of discipline is the worker prisoner. So as you say, like they're gonna try and say there's the deserving poor and the undeserving poor here, the workers and the criminals, but like there's such a high likelihood that they're just going to be people who know each other, who like there's such a high likelihood that like there's going to be workers who will let it happen or even join in, who will know it's going to happen ahead of time because they're going to be part of the community who are starving.
The way I see this kind of thing whenever I hear it, and in fact, I know of a building of apartments that actually recently tried to turn their concierges into cops to like basically give people traffic tickets when they were parking on like the road near the building that's like a private road or whatever. And I know that both of the concierges who worked at that building turned around and said, "We're not doing that, even if you pay us more, and you can't sack us because we've got contracts, etc., this, that, and the other." That's just one example, but I also think that, like, honestly, the way that I see it is that, like, you're right. It will be people will just let people get away with it because they're not getting paid enough, and B, they will probably already feel like a class traitor by being a security guard, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, or like, sorry, not
yeah, exactly. By being securitized as a
being securitized. That's what I mean. Yeah.
But I think Amar's point is about the trade unions, and I think this is a little while ago on the show we had an episode. We had Mildred from Thought Slime on as a guest. It was a little bit of a Red Planet Cringe Corner crossover episode because I was telling everyone about the very cringe guy who invented yellow unions, which are a very cringe thing in general. And I remember like a bit of our discussion got to the point of like the big unions that are kicking around now, are they yellow unions? And like, the simple answer is like none of the big unions are revolutionary unions. So none of them are red unions. And that like is less apparent, I think, to us right now because of the framework and context of like the society we live in at the moment. But like this question Amar's asking, I think you're asking a dialectical question because like literally like we're gonna see the distinction between red and yellow unions so sharply if the question is, do you support people who are robbing big Tesco's?
I think, do you know what I find really interesting about that is that I'm a trade unionist for context, right? Like
Sure.
I came into movement spaces or like the hashtag left through Lesbians and Gay Support the Migrants and through union organizing in the pub I was working at in South London and, through union organizing in hospitality ever since. I'm skeptic, and I think trade unions are so necessary, right, as vehicles for building worker and class power. But I am skeptical as an internationalist and an anti-imperialist, at least, of the potential for trade unions to be revolutionary organizations. Because like fundamentally, like if you are representing the interest of a particular class of people in the global north and the welfare that they are receiving or the dividends that they're getting comes at the expense of this kind of underclass, internally displaced, but also externally through through border securitization, that limits already what is a trade union going to do. And we see this with some of the trade unions voting down motions, that have been proposed at like young TUC conferences historically calling for greener climate policies, for example. We've also seen this in terms of, what one union at the Young TUC conference, I think it was this year, voting down a motion by another union, PCS, which represents, among others, border guards against the hostile environment. Another union then voted it down. So like these things I think it's much more, maybe it can be more productive to think about the fact that like, although workers are cohering within trade unions that meanwhile externally recognized as like red or yellow potentially, right? Like it's actually where workers who are in unions come into contact with other fronts of struggle, whether that's, like not paying your rent or whether that's organized big robbing of pain au chocolat from Tesco's. Like that's where the kind of like revolutionary magic potentially happens, right? But I think you're right. I think there's going to be, unless we see like a rank and filist, surge within trade unions, which I think is happening following the disaffection from, what happened in the first strike wave. I think trade union leadership's always going to fall short. What's interesting is the stuff that it's hard to know what's happening unless you're in the room, with these workers. But I think that's where the kind of interesting stuff happens, because actually at a leadership level, purely on their own terms, in terms of, the capacity for trade unions to be fined loads and loads of money for workers doing radical shit, the leadership is constrained by the need to replicate the trade union and not have it disbanded by cops, right? That was not actually coherent. I've just realized. Sorry, I don't know where we're at with this one.
No, I think it was quite coherent. I could see from like the ADHD wriggle that you got on at what point when I was talking that what it was you were responding to, and you were a little uncomfortable with me saying that like we have no red unions, and we could broadly call them yellow unions, and I definitely agree. It's like democratized, properly democratic, organized bodies of workers are going to be red. That's just that's the frank reality of like human beings organized in a group conscious democratic body. But like this is like it is Mule, what's that saying you use? It's squeaky bum time for the executive committees of these unions, because it's like finding out what it means to have like a CEO who has a six-figure salary for a trade union. This is us finding out, right? Like this is there being high-level execs with big salaries at unions is something that emerges out of like a certain amount of comfortable relationship between, like Mule was commenting on earlier, right? Comfortable relationship between the Labour Party and Labour, like organized Labour, and there being some kind of, I don't know, so some degree of apparatchik moding through it, and then like Blair comes in and everything is it's time to make as much money as possible, and they all get doshed up, and now Starmer's cut like as many ties to unions as possible. So what are the unions realizing are the big hurdles between them and like actually getting shit done? Looks like it's the executive committees. It looks like it's the people who are taking big checks and making unilateral decisions that should be the workers' decisions, right?
Yeah, and I think there are exceptions to this as well, and there are also caucuses within unions who are constantly fighting. So unions themselves are like contested political spaces, terrains of struggle, and we see that in what Sharon Graham's doing is very. And I'm not a stan. I just think what she's doing is very interesting. So we can see that stuff like that can happen. God damn it! 1 minute. I was going to make a point, and it's just disappearing out of my head.
Don't worry. You are on a show with other neurodivergents. We're all literally neurodivergent and a minor. It's completely fine. We love you. Yeah.
Am I valid?
So valid. So valid. So cunty.
I think we've gotten to a point about sorry, I have to announce to the chat that while we've been talking, I've bought some really cunty boots, and I'm really excited about them. I also sent Amara a picture of some horrible boots to try and throw them off their game, but they're too powerful. I was gonna say, I think I think broadly what we're circling around here is that like, given democratic avenues still exist at all, unions can change their own internal policy and constitution in order to like become more red at a shockingly rapid rate. Actually, like they're actually quite capable of becoming more red in response to crisis. Very rapidly, and that is the process of democratization within unions.
Yes, and also we're seeing with this, part of the reason it's important to say, I think, at the recent TUC Trade Union Congress conference, the reason a lot of unions were making very very small noises, or like tentatively or not so tentatively reacting very positively to Angela Rayner's New Deal for Workers, despite what has been taken out about it, is because they know that they are trying to get a consensus across the workers' movement for what resisting restrictions on the rights to strike is going to look like. Like that actually is insane, is very radical, in particular, you know, for TUC unions to be doing, to be thinking that, you know, when the government tries to introduce a mandatory minimum level of service, which means that even if a whole workforce ballots for strike action, certain nurses, you know, or certain is train driver a word? Train drivers are going to have to like, you know, maintain that service. What it looks like for the union movement as a whole to like resist that is risking mass criminalization. So that's also why, you know, the kind of realpolitik of some of these unions being quite, you know, appeasing when it comes to Starmer's Labour is actually part of that bigger picture of trying to gain worker consensus across unions for resisting the state, which is quite radical. But returning to what you mentioned earlier, Sophie, about I think it was it political technology? Was that the term you used?
Yeah.
And what that looks like. So one of the things that Blair did when he came in was introduce a series of individual legal routes by which a worker could supposedly get justice for being mistreated, while maintaining, which served to kind of discourage collective organizing in the same way that Thatcher had done, right? And I think with Starmer, we have to be really attentive to the rules that are going to be brought in and the laws that are going to be brought in, which, you know, might actually on the surface be pretty good for workers who are able to access the so-called criminal justice system, who are able to, you know, actually work their way through that. But the purpose of that legislation is to weaken people's collective identification with the trade unions at a time in which that collectivism among workers hasn't been so strong since, you know, the last 30 years, right? And unfortunately, there is ample ground for that because, you know, while the strike wave of, I think it was of last year, you know, galvanized people, trade unions have never been so widely reported on. You know, trade union gensecs haven't been a household name for quite some time, and now it's quite common. But on the ground, obviously, what that looks like is a lot of workers actually feeling pretty alienated, coming against the limitations of the democratic structures of the trade union, coming against people who have very different politics being in positions of power within workplace union branches and also within, you know, on national execs. So there is also, you know, a whole cohort of people who are quite disaffected by the union structures that they threw a lot of time and energy into, and for whom they risked a hell of a lot and lost a lot of payment, right? Those people who feel betrayed by union leaderships or by union bureaucracy, actually, yes, when it comes to in the future in a Starmer government trying to seek redress for wrongs at work, maybe it's going to be a lot more tempting to go through an individual legal route than trying to organize, you know, as a collective, given experiences that many of them will have had. I'm hopeful that won't happen because obviously this has also been a highly politicizing moment for a lot of people. But people are going to get burnt out by the struggle, right? Like,
Yeah, no, I mean for sure. I'm not sure how much we can do or say in this moment in discussion, like about like Starmer's government and what they're going to do. I think that maybe it's useful for us to talk about unions as they relate to organizing and protests, since this is just like what we have more control over, right? So like to take the robbing pan au chocolat unions condemn or support question a little further, like I think we could ask the even more dedicated question, like, will unions actually like I think anti-fascist demos would be over like that if big unions were willing to like put a delegation towards like actually, you know, being anti-fascist. Like we're willing to actually say like we are an anti-fascist union, and if a bunch of actually saluting Nazis or the people they support, like Posey Parker, are going to try and organize and be, you know, in like doing public rallies, we're not okay with that, and we're gonna lend you know, as many people as are willing to step forward, like to the anti-fascist side. Like that's, you know, that's something I think about quite often, is like the organized and easily mobilized like might of trade unions in the UK is there. It's very powerful when you see, you know, something as specific as like the doctors marching or whatever. You know, it takes up some of the biggest streets in London and shuts down traffic across the entire city. If the RMT, for instance, were just like, we're an anti-fascist union and we're going to send people, you know, to support, like to tell Posey Parker to fuck off. It's not just that like that would be huge numbers on the ground, but it's like in the political arena, like stating publicly that like we are against fascists, I think is like very meaningful, because like fascists, they're cowards, and like if institutions take anti-fascist positions, it's very meaningful to getting them to just like not even try.
Yeah, I think, well, there's so much in that. I mean, obviously, you know, we should probably note that the RMT historically has a long history of actually being well down for the anti-fascist fight, right? But what's happened
it's like I picked them for a reason.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, what if Unite was anti-fascist?
I mean, the terrain of like anti-fascism has changed in some ways loads in the last decade or so, right? And actually what has been happening is there's been very successful caucusing in many trade unions by women who describe themselves as gender critical, right? By transphobes. So actually that, you know, in terms of the policies and the statements that come out of a trade union that are informed by trade union national conferences, for example, like actually there has been a lot of organizing on the other side around that. It's also important to note probably that outside of the cities, I think in Britain, trade unions still actually do, you know, what Sophie was talking about, like in the Southwest, when there have been, you know, so many anti-migrant demos by Patriotic Alternative and by other like fascist groups, the resistance to that, you know, in more isolated parts of the country, rural areas, has come from, strange as it sounds, like local TUC branches, right? Or what's the term? They're not called branches. Anyway, something. Yeah. So, like for example, Bridgewater is a place. It will have its own like trade union council, right? It is them lot who are cohering the kind of scattered anti-fascist left from around the Southwest and doing buses to like get them to go and do anti-fascism. Part of the problem there is, you know, infrastructural though. Like, how consistently can a trade union or a group of trade unions do that locally? Probably not that consistently, because the infrastructure down there in terms of trains and stuff is much, much lower. But the other part of it, I think, is that often trade unions will see themselves as doing this, as providing this support, but often it happens through existing caucuses. Socialist Workers' Party is massive in most of the main trade unions in this country. So when you see SWP people at anti-fascist demos, often like that is not an insignificant amount of like your local active trade unionists. That is the structure through which they tend to organize. I still think it's true that like statements at a top level from unions, you know, putting more resources towards that would be really, really important. Obviously, then you get to the point where how much of your energy do you spend, you know, in internal union politics? In the same way, how much energy should I have put into my local Labour Party back when I was BAME officer for Peckham Labour Party? It then becomes a question of where you direct your energies, I suppose.
Well, I mean, that's I think like what one place where we can see really clear differences between like media institutions, like governmental institutions, even party politics, and trade unions. Because again, and like I'm going to keep bringing it back to this, it's the question is democratization. Because like if on the broad level you got people who are not class conscious, they are not group conscious, they are not politically activated, but they still understand that they should vote, right? You're describing like a lot of the Labour Party membership, right? And then it's like who then gets a say in who is a part of Labour? Like it's not like the Labour Party membership gets a huge say in who's the what is it, NEC of Labour, right? So if it suddenly fills up with TERFs, it's like, well, we can tell everyone till we're blue in the face that TERFs are the tip of a fascist spear. They're the entrance to a far right pipeline, and that they're going to lead any political organization that they're a part of towards being out and out, actual, literal, I'm not fucking kidding, Nazis. But like, if that body, whatever it is not democratized, if it's just a media company, if it's the BBC, if it's Channel 4, if it's the Labour Party, then even if people heard you and believed you, right? Like, where's the resistance to that? Whereas in a very real sense, in the trade union milieu and in the arena and sphere of the unions, like, if you tell people like, hey, that, like, she's saying like, I'm a woman who's concerned about women and I have these legitimate concerns and I'm just gender critical of gender ideology that's harming children. She's saying all that stuff, but in fact she's just a fascist and she's just going to bring more and more fascists in. Again, people could literally not believe you, but like 2 steps forward is the point at which like she's gonna hit a complete wall. Right. And that wall is like trying to bring more fascists in because you've got a body of people who are class conscious and are organized and are democratized. And at that point, like the bit where the TERFs would then start roping in their Tommy Robinson lot, it's like they're going to hit a bunch of people who can tell those people are fascists and have a say in it.
Yeah.
And they're going to say no.
Yeah, fully. I mean, a kind of personal experience around this. So in 2019, I went to the Bakers Union National Conference. I'm not a baker, but like that's one of the unions you can join if you're doing hospitality work, right? And me and a bunch of other young comrades there put a motion together on basically, supporting trans rights, supporting queer people, rejecting this wave of like transphobia and homophobia that was, very much like in the midst of things in 2019, unlike today, joking. And also, it had a suggestion in there that where possible, some of the union procedures were amended so that instead of standing up in conference and calling people brother or sister, you could call them comrade, which is gender neutral. Do you know what I mean? And saying this to, like, the Bakers Union is an incredible union, right? It's small, it's militant, and conference was
comrade is what I call all my partners, just to avoid any confusion.
Same.
Yeah. And we put this motion forward in front of a room of hundreds of generally older and generally white trade unionists, most of them, who'd come from like the Hovis factories, for example, passed unanimously, right? And that was maybe a scenario in which I had been led to believe that actually, like, maybe the older white working class might actually have a problem with this, and literally none of them cared. They were like, yeah, comrade, sure, like, whatever. Do you need any? And then afterwards, people came up to me like, what are your pronouns? Very, very sweet behavior, right? Yeah, that's just a nice story for once, because I don't have many of those,
Yeah, I mean, I made a point like this in Conspiracy on the Left. I was like, if you've got people who will have a complete shit pants tantrum and storm out if you do a pronoun circle, you can't organize with those people. They're simply too sensitive and fragile. Like, they're not people you can call a comrade. And if you try and sneak in any kind of like anti-trans, I shudder to even call it communism, because it's just like, you're not a communist if you're anti-trans, you're not a communist if you're a misogynist. Like, you're just not actually opposing the systems that make the world shit right now.
Yeah, fundamentally don't understand Marxist literature if you haven't
exactly
considered
like
reproductive labor.
Yeah, speaking of which,
like, Engels wrote about it so much, and then like also like just the like communist comes from the Paris Commune, to each according their need, from each according their ability, and you are just defying that basic logic if you don't like support women and queer people and trans people and people of all racialized groups, and like and on and on and on. Sorry. It just really pisses me off.
No, completely. And I was going to do what is obviously a really bad decision and do a little call out, because we love cancel culture, which is a shout out to the Working Class Movement Library, which does like really, really incredible work, like cataloging ongoing and historic resistance. But recently put out a correction after someone in the organization had endorsed a workshop on transphobia and how to fight it. And in no uncertain terms, they put out a correction saying they didn't endorse it and they were an inclusive organization. There is a petition where some comrades involved in the Working Class Movement Library and some comrades from RS21, which is the organization that was running the workshop, want people to sign it, to be like, actually, not very working class movement of you to be inclusive of transphobes, I would encourage people to just Google that and fill it out.
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty
sounds
base.
good. Yeah. And that's the other side of democratization as well, is like if an organization like that carries through the like being inclusive of transphobes, like people will know that they got stank pussy and they should be avoided. Like they're a bunch, they're cringe, and like it's an organization that will like just wither and die. Like this is the eternal curse of transphobia. Like you get Glinner brain. Your wife leaves you, you never see your kids again, and you're having your microwave carbonara for one. And then on the institutional level, it's just like you will watch your institution wither and die if you let TERFs into the main into anything, really, honestly.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it's particularly sad because the Working Class Movement Library does so much incredible stuff. The staff are amazing. The volunteers will be fucking amazing. This isn't coming from the actual body of the institution, right?
Yeah, it's a similar thing that happened with the People's History Museum here in Manchester. They actually hosted Helen Joyce and another transphobe a week ago. I don't know what the outcome of the resistance to that was. It was very early. A lot of and listen, I say this with the biggest of respect and love. A lot of my comrade crusties here in Manchester, they're not that good at getting up early in the morning. So we'll see how that actually went and how that moves forward. But yeah, like it's just the whole sort of like, I just think it's people being like not lazy in the traditional like way that capitalists call workers lazy. It's more lazy in the way that like, oh, we've done our reading, we know what revolution is, we know what solidarity is, we don't need to learn more about inclusivity and all that. We know everything. There's nothing new to learn. And I think they just they're just not read up on like why these institutions are bad, unless they are being told why these people are bad, and they're not listening, in which case that's a completely different matter, and they should be destroyed in the most legal way possible. So yeah, that's
destroyed in the marketplace of debate and kind, nice
yes
words.
That's right. That's what you do. You engage in what do they call it? Polite politics, respectability politics.
Yeah. No pan of chocolate for transphobes.
It's true. It's true. The only pan that they should receive is a pan au merde. We are an international show, and everybody should know what that means. So I'm not going to translate. You need to learn what that is. For our French comrades in the ZAD. Think of our French comrades in the ZAD.
I'm never not thinking of our French comrades in the ZAD. I wake up thinking about them.
Real talk, though, I miss the ZAD so much. Please let me go back.
We'll go back. We'll go back together this time, babe. I got my passport now. So
all right, I'm not coming back again after.
Yes.
I'm just getting to the ZAD and staying.
We'll go in there to retire.
What happened to Sophie? She went to a ZAD upstate. She's happy now. So, Amar, I think we have like a general context that we operate from in the show, kind of a premise that like, shit's falling apart, capitalism has failed, communism is coming. We're here talking about how we get there. I think like our discussion of trade unionism so far, and how it relates to protest. I think one way we could like frame the discussion for the last bit before the Q&A, I think would be productive is like, do we think that like organized institutions like the trade unions like are going to encounter some kind of like similar crumbling points to the way that like governmental and public institutions will do under climate change in general? Because like this is the thing, like capitalism is going to make capitalism inoperable through climate change in a number of years from now. That means all sorts of institutions like, let's just say the whole UK government is going to be pretty inoperable and dissolve into some kind of horrific mess.
What would that be like? One wonders.
Yeah. Imagine if the UK government was a mess. No, but the actual like dissolution of these kinds of things is a question we need to examine, and like the balkanization into little whatevers, and any number of ways that it can break down. I'm curious about like the institutional organized labor of this country, because like one thing we might see is like mass mass industrial collapses, right? And that will surely affect the unions, because like one big you could say flaw, if you were me saying these words right now, flaw of workerism is like the under acknowledgement of the unemployed worker. And like, yeah, so I mean, if there is industrial collapse that sees massive numbers of people in Britain unemployed, like this will have a kneecapping effect on the unions too.
Really, really interesting question. I guess the first thing to acknowledge is that there's already been the RAAC union scandal, and that was Thatcherism, right? Like already the union movement has collapsed. What we have is, you know, people trying to shore it up, right? Stop it crumbling completely. And I think that's, you know, the fear of that what happened to the coal miners could be what happens to the British steelworkers, for example. And North Sea oil workers. That is part of the reason why actually loads of trade unions and lots of think tanks that work with trade unions are putting a hell of a lot of resources and energy towards campaigning internally towards a just transition as a framework, right? There's a reason that loads of climate organizers have gone into the trade union spaces. There's a reason that loads of, you know, trade unionists have gone into climate spaces. And actually that work of trying to figure out what a just transition might look like is happening. Now, I'm not someone who thinks that if we get a just transition for British steel, then actually everything will be fine. I feel like at a planetary level, shit is fucked, right? But there will come a point at which actually, one thing I do want to also recognize is that there do exist spaces within the union movement for unemployed people. Unite Community is one example of this. Those spaces do exist. How much they're mobilized, how important they're seen as being, that's a kind of different matter, I suppose. As industries collapse, because that is going to happen, we might hopefully get the growth of like different industries, of like green industries, for example, right? And those green industries, by the way, could be still very extractive and imperialistic, right? And relying on like lithium mines in South America, for example. But also, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. There can maybe be some nice things. Some nice things are also possible. Now, whether or not the trade union movement as a whole is going to be in a position at the point at which climate collapse reaches Britain in a way that is very recognisable, is a difficult question. I suppose that probably there will come a point at which that the existence of the waged worker who, you know, is able to be a member of a trade union and has guaranteed benefits.
Here we fucking go.
Yeah, right? Like that will probably, at some point, that will quite possibly cease to exist. All you will be left with is like a massive, it won't be a reserve pool of labor. Like that will just be all of us. And it'll be like it was in the bad old days. Now, at that point, yeah, probably the trade unions as we currently understand them aren't going to be functional, but whatever will be necessary to cohere a political body or consciousness out of like an underclass that becomes the mainstream, right? That will come out of the workers' movement. It will come out of, you know, the wreckage of other institutions. It might come out of the wreckage of like what remains of a left Labour project, as much as out of, you know, a left workers' movement, as much as out of, you know, a climate movement that has been mass criminalised. Like out of all of these things, there are new constituencies being forged. There are new political horizons being determined. And so that's, I guess it's not really an optimistic thing, but I guess my answer is, yeah, there will come a point, I believe, because of climate collapse, at which the trade unions will not be able to even do what they currently do. But whatever can do good shit is going to come out of that decline, I suppose.
Well, so if we're imagining a point where they like in the same way that we can imagine them taking proactive steps towards democratization, towards involvement in climate justice, like what could we imagine them, like what steps can we imagine them taking towards like that transition to what is after that? Like what, you know, I just think that it's really, yeah, like I think that like going on pretending that that shit is not gonna fall apart or is not already falling apart is just getting us like naturally the worst possible outcome. So I think that like what could we be aiming for here?
But I think so. I think this is the kind of not funny thing, but the tricky thing about it, right? It's exactly that acknowledgement that leads trade unions to actually throw a lot of weight behind lobbying the Labour Party and the Labour government, right? Like the scale of change that needs to happen. It involves, transnational supply chains and like pipelines and all of that shit, which I believe, at least in the short term, needs states to renegotiate what the fuck's going on at a global level, which means that you need to have some way of influencing the government of the state in which you are participating in worker struggle. And that brings us back to the fucking Labour Party, right? And we've already talked about the limitations of that, and it's such a catch-22.
Well, it's just like the limitation of that is that the state exists to mediate class tensions in favor of the ruling class unless and until it's overthrown by a dictatorship of the proletariat. So it's just like that like lobbying the Labour Party as it exists is, I don't know if that's like, yeah, I just don't know if that's even, if I can imagine something that is fairly described as that as part of this solution. I think that like organizing mass general strike to force Labour's hand is a very different thing.
Oh, so I agree. I don't actually think, to be clear, this is the solution, but I think that's the logic
Sure.
behind it, right?
Right. Okay.
But also, there are reasons why a mass general strike in this country hasn't happened, and part of that is it's just sort of illegal, right? I think it's going to require. I think those forms of militant action can happen, right? I think that what will be a big test is if the government actually does try to start prosecuting unions and trade unionists for not maintaining minimum services. We might actually see a shift back to trade unions acting collectively and willing to break the law to do so. If that happens, then what a trade union is or can be for, that will shift again in popular consciousness, right? And actually, under those conditions, it's possible that trade unions are able to be incubators or supporters for increasingly militant direct action, not necessarily through the trade unions, but I can imagine a scenario, potentially where trade unions who do get loads of fucking money are able to productively lose some of those resources so that some absolute mad cunts and balaclavas can go and fuck some shit up, right? Like, that's what I would love to see within the trade union if it wasn't illegal, because obviously I respect the law. Now,
law is the arbiter of all morality, and we don't encourage anyone to do anything that would be morally wrong, like
That's
breaking
right.
the law.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, good answer. Yeah. Fair enough. Asked and answered. Thanks.
I guess one addendum to that, I think what's going to be the trickiest thing is actually trying to stop trade unions from basically predicating all of the stuff that they're going to be campaigning for, but even the militant shit they might be supporting is going to be quite hard once, so many people are going to need to move, right? So many people are going to be migrating. The securitization of the border is happening at an alarming rate. It has happened already. I'm really worried as to, in what we currently call, potentially an apocalyptic situation, but also check out Sophie's recent content, pretty good on that shit. In that kind of a context, I don't know, I would love to believe the union movement wouldn't be accepting that we should increasingly securitize the border in order to get benefits for workers in Britain. Experience tells me that actually we can't really rely on that though, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is an example where we see like trade unionism running against the interests of the working class, because like this is where like internationalism will fall down with trade unionism, because we are within what Lenin called the labor aristocracy. We benefit from imperialism while still being the working class, and so for example, trade unions, if it were a serious thing that were being proposed, would absolutely support UBI, and that would be a devastating move for the progress of the working class under like climate collapsing late stage capitalism. It would be absolutely catastrophic in terms of like paralyzing people, holding them in place, and trying to suppress class consciousness. Even while it would provide like a short-term boon to people's like material conditions and ability to survive through the collapsing supply chains, it would still like absolutely fuck our ability to like get rid of the people who are making this happen and stop the thing from happening to us. And trade unions will definitely support UBI. Any move towards UBI. Not saying that the UK government is going to actually propose UBI, because that would that's a move to give poor people free money. And I think when you say those words out loud in the UK, yeah, I think they've just dispatched several squad cars to my house right now. I said the bad words that aren't allowed. But yeah, we have a bunch of audience questions actually. They've been good, and they've been asking a bunch of questions since we provoked them to. So, Kira, do you want to read us some?
Yes, I would. Okay, first question is from Gwen from the Witches. Question, how do you see us working through and preventing competition between orgs? My union competes with a number of similar unions who also do great work, and I want to try to reduce that.
This is a really interesting question. I've got experience with this, right? So as a worker organizer in South London, I quit hospitality like 2 months ago, so I can't claim that authentic working class credit anymore, guys. Reverting back to previous childhood class position, RIP. But we joined the Bakers Union just because it was the one that someone said we should join. If you're in hospitality, you can also join Unite, IWW, IWGB, UVW. But our experience having gone on wildcat strike action, won the demands of our wildcat strike, and then kind of negotiating union bureaucracy, trying to figure out whether we should be, trying to fight for contract terms first or union recognition first, how that shit worked. We wasted a lot of time. And by the end of it, we realized that as workers who had done this shit, who'd gone on strike, who were in struggle, we actually knew the context of our local workplace and our local area, better than anyone else. And it was incredible to have the union support, and you need union support. But the actual work of doing that, the actual work of organizing isn't something that we can alienate, if you like, even to an overworked and underpaid trade union organizer, because that's what most trade union organizers who are on the ground and not in an office are. They are exploited, right? What we ended up doing was we set up a network called South London Bartenders Network, and you didn't have to be a union member to join. You didn't have to pay anything to join. Literally just a WhatsApp group. And we started it in the pandemic. We just started meeting regularly on Zoom calls to talk to each other about work. And we did what we kind of jokingly called guerrilla unionism, which was that if anyone in the network knew someone who was having issues at work, we would just totally lie and be like, yeah, sure, they're in my union. And also I am definitely an accredited shop steward of this union. And we would go and rep them, where we'd taught each other employment law, and we'd go and face off against the employers, and we'd say, listen, here's a maximum penalty we can get from you in court. As a pub in a COVID economy, do you reckon you can afford to pay that? Because if not, you can solve this quite easily right now. Otherwise, you'll be hearing from union lawyers. There were no union lawyers. There was no union half the time. But this form of organizing meant that when people came into the network...
That, if you're falling in love with a ma, do not worry. That is only natural. What that meant was that we were bringing people into the workers' movement. So when they came to the unions or to us going through a problem, we took their ongoing disputes when the unions wouldn't. After we'd helped them along, they then joined a trade union. And we listed all of the unions they could join, and we told them what we thought were the benefits and the pitfalls of all of the unions. But what held us as a very transient workforce, bartenders leave jobs or get fired very frequently, but where did they go? Other bars. So we started having this autonomous structure of people within South London, where at one point we had 50, 60 active bartender trade unionists just in South London across 5 different trade unions and none, right? So I guess what I would say is, if you can cohere locally, start off with socials, right? Start off with get some money from your local trades council or from your union branch, or do a fundraiser. Buy cheap beer, buy cheap food, do it in a community hall that you can pull a favour from. I'm sure someone in the union movement near you knows a Labour councillor, right? Use a church hall, whatever. Do a social. Get a reputation of being a place where people do good politics can get pissed and also get good food. You can start building those interrelated worker solidarities that can eventually counteract the power of the union bureaucrats when you are in a place of struggle. Yeah, that would be my advice.
I do also want to say how vindicated I'm feeling right now in previously saying, not just on this show, but again and again and again on my stream, it is just as simple as starting a WhatsApp group. Literally, it's just that simple. And Amar has fucking confirmed it. Anyway, thank you. I will read the next question. It's from Shafiq Mogg, and they say, how do you think the confluence of queerness and race affects your activism?
Ooh, queerness as a compliment is a really nice idea. I think that, okay, so in terms of race, so how does it affect my activism? I guess firstly, how it affected my like political consciousness, I suppose, is that like as someone who grew up in a family that very soon after I was born became firmly middle class, right? Moved out of Hounslow, kind of made it, right? Sikh family, model minority, the whole thing. But I was also growing up in a post 9/11 context. And by the time we left London, I was going to a very white school. So racialization, experiencing what it meant to grow up post 9/11, that massively made me distrustful of the state, right? Particularly with the Iraq War. Like all of my extended family were like, I mean, they'd grown up under Thatcher, half of them are landlords now, but even they were like, you know, obviously you can't trust the West, this is about oil. There was some level of consciousness that was there. And in particular, growing up and being told, listen, it doesn't matter what you say, like you will never really belong here. And at the time, I thought that was just kind of like, you know, quite sad because I was part of that British Asian generation where we were, no, I'm British and I'm Asian. Obviously, I'm not either. Fuck it. But so that racialization kind of, I guess, is what first gave me those politics. And then queerness, my relationship with that, we won't go into it too much, but it affected my class position. And that gave me like actual class politics, right? So I think that's how it affected my personal politics. In terms of my activism, though, I think that I think that probably the most useful thing about it has been being able to use my positionality as a queer, genderqueer person of color to try to actually shout down identitarianism, to actually try to pull back towards you know, a politics that is materialist, right? And a conception of racism and queerness as kind of processes and things that can be claimed as part of a political coalition. I guess those are arguments you can only really make in this context if you are small with particular lived experiences. Now, I guess my kind of activism, I hate that word, but when it comes to provision work, when it comes to turning up outside hotels with asylum seekers, when it comes to feeding each other, clothing each other, doing kind of like hyperlocal community work, a lot of that is massively informed by being queer and needing to find community, right? Or like found family, as we used to call it back in, I don't know, 2016. I think that's probably been the biggest part of it, like realizing that like at its best, queerness can be a force for transforming social relations and a sense of possibility that gives you. It's that, I guess the flip side of it is that as a femme brown person, I was arrested and none of the white people around me were. So,
would you say it's a pretty radicalizing experience then?
I think it can be. I don't think it's inherently. I think it can be.
No, I was just talking about like the final point there, you know.
Oh, the fight.
Not the whole thing you said. Yeah, just you know, the fact that you were singled out, you know, it could be pretty radicalizing.
I mean, like my personal feeling, and I'm not like like my personal opinion is like Amar has a lot of protests and is probably like notable to the cops, and like it's very obvious them using the powers to target a queer, you know, like there's a queer brown protester, grab them. But also like I do think there's an element of the police knowing who is a regular and trying to stop people who are regulars at protests from being at more protests.
100%. I think that's really true. And I think that, like, you know, it's not that I stood out, you know, in a vacuum from other white comrades who had been at, like, you know, lots of protests. It's also that, like, our organizing spaces are very white, and it's kind of important to do something like that, you know? Maybe next time it'll be 50-50, whether it's me and the other brown femme person, you know?
Right. Risk Inverse has asked, what can Western organizers learn from efforts around the world against the neoliberal food economy from countries like India as an example? I think they're referring to the farmers' strikes in India, and there were also very large protests about food and fuel costs in about this time last year.
Yeah, I think probably the first thing that we can learn is that actually the agents of genuinely revolutionary change are likely to be people in the global south, right? And as a result of that revolutionary change, our quality of life is likely to suffer. And that is what it means to be an internationalist, is to recognize that, a lot of the benefits that we have here are ultimately founded on the wages of whiteness, notwithstanding some of us.
Can I interject on this one? This is maybe semantic, but I do like quite firmly believe that with our own revolutionary change within the imperial court, our quality of life specifically does not really have to change very much. It's our standard of living. It's the particulars of what we get and how we get it. But the like quality of being alive, I think would be much better if we could go out to the woods and chill out with our friends and eat some funny mushrooms or whatever, as opposed to working 100 hours a week for a fintech startup in Canary Wharf.
I'm really, really grateful to you for that correction. That's completely and utterly correct. And I don't think it is just semantics, actually. I think it conveys a particular politics. So thank you for that. But I guess more practically, with the Kisan Andolan, with the farmers movement in India, what we saw was a mass trade union movement occupying the highways for 1.5 years, which is absolutely mental. They were able to do that because of the Sikh practice of langar, which is basically a communal food provision that happens in Gurdwara, in Sikh temples, and other religious spaces in India. So the care work that I was talking about, near the beginning of the show, they were able to do a 1.5-year occupation of the highways precisely because they had the food infrastructure to enable them to do that. We don't have, I think there are amazing stories of when Occupy happened in London, of the food infrastructure that was kind of created to enable that occupation to happen. And it's quite striking to me that, we're approaching times in which, we're talking about longer term militant direct actions and occupations. Still don't necessarily have that kind of infrastructure or philosophy, to enable the groundwork to enable some of those kind of things. I guess the other thing that we can learn is that the Kisan Andolan, the farmers' protest in particular, actually involved a massive rejection of electoral politics broadly. It wasn't pushed forward by any political party. It was pushed forward by the trade unions, but the trade unions themselves were pushed by the grassroots. And that happened in reaction to the fact that in previous years, when the trade union movement had been a big part of unseating the previous coalition BJP right-wing neoliberal government, that hadn't, that was repaid in kind in some sense by the Congress government that came in after, but it was still predicated on the effectively kind of neoliberal logics of the Green Revolution. This is getting it hyper-specific into global South agricultural policy, but basically, if you do a liberalism and you fail to deliver and it leads to a fascism, people will then actually take increasingly radical direct action and turn away from electoral politics and start prefiguring different ways of being through that, right? At the same time, important to not fetishize too much is probably really important, right? Yes, the Kisan Andolan specifically, and I'm talking about this because I know about it more, it brought together Hindus and Muslims and Christians, it brought together Sikhs, it brought together people of different castes. But some of the states that were involved in the protests voted the BJP back into government after the success of the Kisan Andolan because they were convinced that actually it was still better to side with upper caste Hindus than it was to side with Dalit Muslims. One of the major leaders of the Kisan Andolan movement, Rakesh Tikat, he was implicated in anti-Muslim riots in 2013 in Muzaffarnagar, and yet this man is, he was the one who led the charge to basically save the protest when they were facing rubber bullets and literal cages. So yeah, it's complex. Basically, a lot to learn tactically. Probably the most useful to take from it is to think about how we can build infrastructures of provision that we can roll out in antagonistic situations, I guess.
I think that's fantastic. Absolutely. I mean, there's
Great
a lot of like we are aware of like a strike fund, but we could be doing a lot better than that. And just infrastructure that supports the strike in the long run. Kira, next question.
Yeah, it's from Cat Girl Steph. Is that a sports ball jersey? And would you like a moment to talk about sports if that's a thing you enjoy?
This is so sweet. I don't know. I basically don't do sports. Like that's a thing that I just don't do at all. But my mate Louis, who used to work at the pub with me, makes these kind of, I think it's like a hockey jersey kind of thing. And I was like, oh, it's a pig with a gun. That's obviously about the police, right? And he was like, oh my God, that's such a good idea. So then he made me one, and it says like 1312 on the back. I don't know what numbers mean.
That fucks so hard.
That's adorable.
I
I love that.
It's my favorite number. It's literally just my favorite. What a coincidence.
Yeah. But I love that you probably love sports. I think that's cool, and you are valid, you know?
I think that Steph noticed that it wasn't a sports ball jersey because Kira failed to mention the prefix to that question, which is question, not political, in parentheses. I think that was an attempt at sarcasm. I'm not sure. Steph, can you confirm in the chat immediately? But the next question is from Yucca Mountain Johnny, and they say, question, building a revolutionary or social movement union seems like a zero-sum situation to most union members. Such a transition would appear to inhibit the union's ability to defend the economic or working conditions of its members. What do you think a good conversational counter to this mindset might be?
Ooh.
Yeah, it's big. That's a big one.
Good question.
That's a big brain question.
That's a good one.
A good conversational counter. Can I hear that one again?
Absolutely.
I want to try in different words for a second. It's the short-term aims of trade unionism improving workers' conditions in this economy are counter to the long-term aims of building a revolutionary project so that we have better conditions in a different economy. So if some people are wedded to this economy because they don't understand that, what would we say to them?
I guess what we would say is that, you know, on its own terms, the status quo, you know, by which there is a bargain to be made, right? Between a kind of resurged workers' movement and the forces of capital, like, is very unstable and is already on its own terms kind of in the process of collapse. And we see this with, you know, the cost of living crisis supposedly now on its second year running. That's not a crisis. That's like the new normal, right? Like, on its own terms, like even you know, as things currently are, without a more radical movement-based kind of trade union ecology, can the person you're talking to get a visit? Can they get a doctor's appointment at the moment? Can they actually, like, you know, provide for themselves or their families? Like, are they still paying like over half of their income towards rent so someone can sit on an asset? And I guess linking that to the bargain that was made when Blair was brought in, which is to continue the kind of Thatcherite consensus on trade unions and what that has meant for us now. I guess maybe a conversation starter for someone who's, you know, a dyed-in-the-wool old school trade unionist would be like, you know, we don't look too kindly on the bargains that were made during the Blair years. Like, do you want to be part of the trade union movement that tries to make those same bargains now, or do you want to be, you know, the movement that still cites the toll puddle martyrs as, you know, part of its kind of political tradition? Like, I don't know. Trade unionists, we love a story. We love a great arc of history. Hit us with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to perpetuate perpetuate senile capitalism through the crisis that's killing itself is not what, like, the Blair Mountain miners fought and died for. Right. Let's do another one. Let's do an entirely another one. Alex all over the place says, how and what would be the best way for comrades around the world to connect and provide solidarity? For instance, housing advocates in France, UK, and America sharing ideas. This
is where I think, you know, the big institutions that, you know, we're rightly so critical of actually have a little bit of a role to play. Like, I think it's no accident, right, that like the academy and like the universities and the conferences and the paid hotel rooms and shit they were able to do, those resources were a big part of like cohering the literature around abolitionism. And through that, it reached a lot more people, right? And I think a similar thing is true. You can kind of piggyback a little bit off the various, I mean, to be honest, the union movement is probably the most well-positioned to do some of this. There are various like NGOs and stuff, you know, and obviously NGOization of the left, bad. Unfortunately, they're the people with the resources. So yeah, that's the kind of thing I'd say. Then there's, you know, there are also still some projects here that like are attempting to like bring comrades over to meet and stuff. I'm probably not the best place to talk about that though, I think, just because I haven't done it.
Okay, fair enough. Kira, do you want to ask the next one?
Sure. This is from Ashrand. They say, as a very disabled and housebound person, I get that there are a really limited number of ways I can contribute to supporting my comrades. Is there something you wish people were doing more in general?
I think it's so specific to your kind of to your local context, right? In your local area, like, in certain environments, it's like, you know, why are people not helping with food, or it's like, why are people not volunteering to facilitate a meeting, or like, or it's even, you know, why are people not making things more accessible so that people, you know, that are disabled and do have other barriers to access to like political engagement aren't isolated and aren't alienated and can still continue to like engage and take part. Like, it's just, you know, it's so completely the case that there is loads and loads of stuff to do that is not the kind of like sparky frontline shit. Like, actually, like, that is a kind of like tip of the iceberg of what actually matters, right? Like, it's all of the other stuff that happens. It's anything that counteracts alienation, anything that helps bring people together and see one another as kind of, you know, revolutionary agents and comrades and friends. Like, that shit is what actually matters. In terms of anything specific, I don't know, babe. I guess, you know, follow your heart, innit?
Very materialist answer. Follow your heart. Absolutely. Nat has asked a question for Amar. Looking forward to the consequences of climate. Sorry, let me just. I realized there's an intonation problem in this question. Text does not communicate tone well, so let's try that one again. I think what she meant was looking forward to the consequences of climate change. It's hard to imagine the British government moving away from its current trajectory of an increasingly fascist approach to refugees, moving them between various configurations of concentration camps regardless of party. What do you think we need to be able to do more than block some of the most evil actions? IMO, it requires the working class seizing land in an organized way.
So I back that, but I think there are intermediary steps that are going to be necessary, right? I want to be a bit careful here, but okay. Let's think about the term people trafficker, right? So, or people smuggler, which is very, very common. This is another political technology that Sophie was talking about earlier, right? Like, suddenly the people smuggler or the people trafficker is like a folk demon, if you like.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Starmer saying that he wants to treat them like terrorists who are attacking the nation, right?
Yeah, literally. Criminal gangs, like, these are all legalistic categories, right? Like, I'm not saying that people that are getting people over here in small boats are good people. What I'm saying is that, like, a lot of them are themselves people who have been victims and survivors of bordered violence and are making money because other refugees have been made vulnerable by those systems. Now, those people traffickers and people smugglers, using those terms, are the only ways that a lot of asylum seekers or migrants can reach these shores. And those are very exploitative conditions. It involves like horrendous violence in lots of cases, right? I'm not saying these are good people by any stretch. Hypothetically, what would an alternative version of that look like that was not extractive and exploitative? What it would look like would be a conspiracy to commit quite a big crime, right? Like, let's be real about that. But actually, we're talking about building infrastructures that we shouldn't really be talking about on this call, to be honest. But like, in your area, you need have a thing, you know? What are the assets that collectively you can very quietly get under control? What are the systems of information sharing and knowledge production that would be useful to enable someone who needs to stay hidden? How do you develop networks of trust that enable provision to happen regardless of that? How can you, you know, counteract alienation while still learning as best you can to maintain a level of security culture?
Yeah, I'll say this, and it's been an ongoing, like, I mean, it's part of what Red Planet is part of, is informational infrastructure. Well, like, I think is something that's going to massively shape that struggle specifically, because it's going to involve a lot of stuff that people will need to invent answers to questions, and when that's the thing that's going on in a struggle, there are questions and there are fresh answers to them that need to be shared. We need good informational infrastructure. That's like really important to that.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Totally agree.
Right. That's actually all the questions. So, is
Oh my
our
God.
homework this week to go sign the petition?
Yeah, but also have a look and see if there are any legal observer trainings that are going on in your area. Legal observers fulfill really important roles. They're at demos and protests, monitoring what the police are doing and making a note of it. You get a high-vis bib. It's generally like low risk, and basically there's never enough of them. And if you're someone who doesn't necessarily want to be in the middle of a fray, but you do want to just like know how to record what the police are doing in a way that can be useful later on in court, look out for that too.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's a good homework. I know a few people who've acted as legal observers, and they're all really solid lads. They happen to all be lads. It's not. It's no further comment.
I write lads with an X so often that I no longer see it as a gender term. It's quite problematic.
Oh my God, Lad X. I'm learning. This is new. I've never heard of this. I'm going to start saying it. Thanks.
When you say it, though, you have to say lads with an X, so people know that you're putting an X instead of the A.
Oh, it's it's like LX. Oh yeah, okay. I'm seeing it in the chat now. LXD. This is blowing my mind. I love this. Everything about this is great.
So, Amar, you've blown Mule's mind. I think you've blown everyone's mind. You've been a great guest. Is there anything you want to plug? Anywhere that you want people to find you online, or anything online that you'd like direct people to before you head off?
I just so should have thought about this, but on the plus side, I feel less hungover than when we started, so I'm going to take that as the win. But I am on Blue Sky since you got kicked off Twitter. My friends did note that I got kicked off Twitter and immediately arrested. I would like to maintain there's not a link between those things. But yeah, it's at Amardeep Singh D on Blue Sky, and also Insta. I'm cute. Look me up. Other than that, what should I be plugging? Oh, Red Pepper I'm a co-editor at Red Pepper. It's an amazing lefty internationalist magazine. It's like quarterly. Our new issue is out. It's all about Pan-Africanism, but it's not all about that a significant chunk. That's how like editors work. Anyway, yeah, check it out. It's good.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a delight to have you here, and I look forward to us having you back.
Oh wait, one last thing. Oh my God, one last thing. I totally forgot. Yeah, because you're going to be there, Sophie. I work for an organization called The World Transformed. It's going to be 4 days in Liverpool, 7th to the 10th. Debates, parties. There's going to be a lot of people we all disagree with, but there's going to be a lot of people who can teach you some cool shit too. So check it out. And if you're about, come say hi.
Cool. And as Amar says, I will be there. I'm actually on 2 panels. So yeah, check out The World Transformed. Thank you so much, Amar. I hope you have a lovely night.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to go have another beer.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Thanks for talking. Solidarity.
Well,
Well,
what a lovely guest.
what a lovely, lovely comrade.
Well. We've all got our homework. We've all had a lovely chat. There's only one thing left to do, and that's for you all to give us your fucking money. So,
Do it now.
Red
Do it
Planet
now.
is made possible and supported by you lovely people going to patreon.com/red_planet and giving us your fucking money. So, Kira,
right.
do you want to tell us about one of the tiers that people can support us at?
I will randomly
patreon.com/red_planet.
start at the beginning.
Oh,
Yeah.
disappointing.
Sprite mode for as little as $2 a month or $180. No, it's $2. It's £2.
It's £2.
£2.
£2.
Yeah.
Sprite mode, $2 a month, £2, and then some amount of New Zealand dollars. Can't possibly comprehend that. Get started with your support for Red Planet by becoming a Sprite. Benefits include the sacred and forbidden knowledge that you are helping the Red Planet team, early access to VODs, and access to the Red Planet Discord.
Yeah. I think it's worth saying also that when we've mentioned limited hangouts during the episode today, when limited hangouts is up for patrons, it will be available to all patrons. So that's included in Sprite Mode as well.
And what Sophie is referring to is the podcast that we've already recorded a couple episodes, and it's awesome. I was on the show with Sophie and Conrad, and we talked about conspiracy theories regarding the Democratic Party. Super, super fun time. Awesome episodes will be released after that too. I don't want to reveal too much, but you're going to definitely want to have access to that podcast. So for as little as $2 a month, you can. But Mule, what if I feel a little goblin-y? A little, you know.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I didn't know that the limited hangouts were going to be available to sprites, and I disagree with all of this, but since it's a democracy, I'm obviously in the minority, so I'm upset. But anyway, enjoy that, you scroungers. Okay, so the next tier that we've got, it's a better tier. It's for better people, really. It's called Goblin Mode, and it's $10 a month if you're in the US, and it's also £8.50, I think, in the UK. Yes, it's £8.50 in the UK.
I'm in the UK. I'll check for you. Yeah,
thanks.
It's £8.50.
It's not like I don't have it up on my screen or anything like that. It's nothing to do with that.
It's your first day.
It's not my first. It is my first day.
No, you're right. It's his birthday, actually.
It's my birthday. It's my birthday, so you should give Red Planet money. It's everyone loves a goblin. We all get a little goblin mode from time to time. Complete your gobology by going goblin mode with everything from Sprite mode. A pack of cool Red Planet stickers for you to stick in legal places and only places like that. Access to exclusive Red Planet Discord hangouts, like the one that Kira did with Tim when they were doing Star Trek. That's what they did.
We watched 2 Star Trek episodes, one from TNG and one from DS9. And if anyone here is new or need a reminder, I'm a big Trekkie, so that was fun for me. And Tim doesn't have any Trekkie experience, so that was fun for me to Trek-splain a ton of stuff. Yeah, we should do another one soon. That was so fun.
We should do another one. And there was a film that I was thinking about us watching on it, and it'll come to me eventually, but yes, we should. You will enjoy it, and that's why you should be a goblin. Give us money. The next money giving mode is one that Sophie's going to tell us about, aren't you, Sophie?
I sure am. Yeah, well, I mean, why would I not? That's because it's beast mode, and beast mode does cost £17. But you're thinking that's a lot of pounds. I mean, how many dollars is it? Who even
20,
knows?
Actually,
Kira knows. But wait, there's more, because it may cost £17 or $20, but you get a lot of stuff for it. Let me tell you about that. All the stuff from the lower tiers and pin badges. Yep, pin badges. Wear your excellent new Red Planet pin badge literally everywhere. It is completely cool and good to do. So yeah, you get little. Well, where's my pin badge actually? I wish I had it to hand to show you all right now, but you do get pin badges, and they're really neat, and you'll like them. But there is one final tier, and I think Kira needs to tell us all about the sickest possible type of Red Planet supporter there is.
I do need to make an announcement for public safety.
Are you ready? Are you ready for this?
There's some sickos amongst us, and I just before we get to that. Just stay tuned. If you want to be one of these sickos, $100 a month. And
it's pretty sus. It's pretty sus. Because you said Among Us.
From the hit game Among Us.
You said Among Us, didn't you? So
yeah, forever down the history of time, whenever I say that in just natural speech, people go, whoa, whoa. You know what you said. I'll have you know Among Us existed before the game. Anyways, let's start this over. For $100 a month, you can be a sicko. Or for how many pounds? 85 pounds? 80?
85 pounds.
85 pounds.
All right, cool.
85 quid.
If you support us this much, we can only really reasonably offer you all of the stuff from the lower tiers, plus a very special thank you message at the end of every stream. So we need to bring your attention to 3 sickos that are among us. JBP, Nerlon Starfire, and Queen Pib. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sickos. I'm not
Wow.
laughing at you. I'm just laughing at Kira.
I'm laughing with you, sickos.
Yes, I'm laughing with you because if I was a sicko, I'd be laughing. I don't know why.
I'd be saying, ha ha ha.
You're deranged.
Yes. Ha ha ha. If I was a sicko.
I mean, I am deranged. That's true. Not sure about the
but if
sickos.
people-
I'm pretty sure that they're, you know,
I think that they're
they're pretty cool and we love them.
We would never say weird
realized-
things about our sickos.
No.
I've realized that I did actually lie to the chat, which is kind of fucked up. So I'm gonna address that immediately. I'm gonna undo my lie by now telling the truth. There is not only one way to support Red Planet. There are 2 ways to support Red Planet. You can go to the Patreon, but also you can buy our merch because we now have merch modeled by me. Right there, look, that's me wearing the t-shirt, but you can also get a tote bag. We only have the one design right now, but we're working on some more fun ones. The one we have at the moment is the Queer Existence is Resistance shirt. If you are a podcast listener and you aren't seeing it right now, and you're too lazy to go check it out at the link, it's got the words "Queer Existence is Resistance" around a flagging hanky tucked into a popper's bottle, being lit to make a tiny little Molotov cocktail. And I think it's neat, but I would think that because I designed it.
And you can't ever look as beautiful as Sophie, but you can come close if you get this shirt. You can get there just almost. You will be within reach of greatness, but
You mean it?
yeah, well, you know, it's hard to get to that level. You can't get to that level. It's impossible, actually. But you can get kind of near there a bit.
It's like how you have to become closer to God, but you'll always be a sinner.
That's exactly what it's like. But it's a goddess, and she's right here on this show.
I think all the hosts should, when we get our merch, we should do some like proper photo shoot modeling, and we'll have all of us on this screen and not just me. That would be cool. Anyway, there is merch. Check it out. That's cool.
Sorry, was that weird? Sorry.
I think this past like 5 something minutes has been solid weird, and I'm pretty sure probably I'll get not on the internet again.
My stomach hurts from laughing for the last few minutes. It's been a hell of a time. So I'm just gonna ask where we can find Kira.
You can find me you can find all my links at my link tree. It's linktra.ee/Kira chats as my not safe for work links that I can't mention here. Those are available there. It's the very first one that's moving in its own accord. If you want to see a moving link, go to my link tree. You'll see what I mean. But I also mainly stream on Twitch. So it's twitch.tv/Kira chats. I will be streaming tomorrow. Tomorrow's my Streamer Friday. So it'd be nice if you showed up and said, "Happy Streamer Friday, streamer." I would love that. I'm also on Blue Sky's KiraChats.bluesky or bsky.social. I'm on Twitter. I refuse to call it anything else. It's twitter.com/Kira Chats. Everything's under Kira Chats. But where can I find my sweet, adorable Peanut, who I have apparently been bullying behind the scenes this entire show?
No, you haven't. It's fine. I've been bullying Kira as well. It's been mutual. It's not bullying
each other out.
When 2 people bully each other, it's just called a fight. You know, like we just had a fight. Like, no, we didn't. But you can find me. Thanks. You can find me at linktra.ee/DJMUEL. Both of my co-hosts are laughing, and it's putting me off. But it's fine because I made them laugh. And that's where you can find all of my stuff. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on another YouTube channel that's my VOD channel. You can give me money to my Patreon if you want to give Red Planet host more money. You should give us all money on all of our sites that we get money on. But specifically, if you want to give me money, you should go to the Possum tier of my patron or above, because I've recently released a massive 2-hour-long movie review. There's a video of me doing a load of movie reviews. It's like 13 movies or some shit. And that's that. So that's very good for me. And you should watch me on twitch.tv/DJ Mule. But what about Sophie? Where can we find sweet Sophie?
Patreon.com/Sophie from Mars. Cool. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Don't
Bye.
forget Tim. Don't forget Tim. Don't forget Tim. He can be found.
Has a link tree. It's linktree.ee/conquest of dread. All one word. Go nuts. Have fun with that.
It is.
Bye.
There
Bye.
it is.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.